I stood at the lectern, taking in the festive crowd gathered for the law firm's annual Christmas party, an occasion traditionally marked by the announcement of new partners and senior partners. The ballroom at the Hyatt was packed with a couple of hundred colleagues and guests, all standing, applauding, whistling, and clapping. After 20 years with Douglas and Schutz, I had achieved the milestone of becoming a senior partner. The crowd's enthusiastic response left me humbled and deeply moved. Throughout my career, I had strived to be both a skilled attorney and a thoughtful leader, always advocating for the underdog, whether inside the firm or in the courtroom. This moment was the culmination of 2 decades of hard work and dedication, a goal I had long envisioned. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes landed on my wife of 25 years, standing at the front table with tears glistening in her eyes. She was flanked by Robert Carter, the firm's most senior partner, and his wife Isabel. Now it was my turn to deliver a brief, light-hearted speech, one that would properly acknowledge everyone who had played a role in my success. I decided I could start by thanking my wife, though the thought crossed my mind that her recent affair with Robert might have been an unexpected contribution to this achievement. While I believed I had earned the senior partnership on my merits, I couldn't deny that her extracurricular activities likely hadn't hurt. I raised my hands, trying to tame the overwhelmingly inebriated crowd. I was possibly the only sober person in the room, since the announcements were never made until after dinner and drinks. Lots of wine and all the typical nonsense associated with a Christmas party. The firm picked up the tab for the hotel rooms for the night or cab rides home, since it would not be a good thing for one of the best litigation firms in town to have a few of its members spending the night in a Chicago jail. After a few more minutes, people began resuming their seats at the large round tables in the ballroom, and the din abated enough that I could begin my speech. I noticed that Robert was now sitting closer to Nora, and his right hand was under the tablecloth, probably stroking her nylon-covered leg. I had watched her dress in the hotel room and watched her roll those smoke-colored stockings up her gorgeous legs and attach them to a garter belt. She winked at me as she left off her panties, promising a passionate night after the festivities. I had smiled at her, barely managing to keep from throwing up. Just 2 days before this festive occasion, a private investigator had sat in my office and laid it out for me, photos and all, but I had not been surprised. In the hotel room, I wondered why she was going to grace me with some hot sex, since it had been months since we'd been intimate. Did she realize that? Or was she so busy screwing Robert that she forgot to give me a little? Did she think I wouldn't notice the absence of sex and the other signs of infidelity along the way? We used to have a very active and imaginative sex life, but that stopped about 6 months ago. Of course, as a litigator, I was working a lot, and Nora, as the toast of Chicago caterer to the rich and powerful and famous, she was busy too, but that never stopped us in the past. She had just turned 45 and was more beautiful than ever at 5'8" and maybe 110 pounds, all the curves in the right places and the most beautiful blonde hair. She was lots of men's dream girl, and I had won her in college. Too bad I couldn't keep her. Sometimes tragedy and triumph follow close on each other. Maybe I could use that thought in my speech, I mused. But anyway, I guess she was planning some sort of gesture, maybe a token of congratulations for making senior partner, or perhaps a farewell gesture. Or maybe she was trying to connect with Robert during the festivities and thought I wouldn't notice. At least our growing distance over the months had spared me from caring too much about that. But who knew what she thought the night would bring? Well, I did. I knew I wasn't going to be spending the night or any future night with her. She could align herself with the entire law firm for all I cared. Actually, I cared deeply. But betrayal was something I couldn't and wouldn't accept, especially with that smug scumsucker, Robert Carter. He wasn't much of a lawyer, but he was an effective politician, knowing all the skeletons in closets both in Chicago and down in Springfield, the state capital. I could barely tolerate the guy, and Nora knew it. Why did she have to associate herself with him, the smarmy scumsucker? I had figured out she was having an affair early on but never let on, doing what a good litigator did, gathering the evidence and keeping my cards close to my vest and planning my exit. Actually, since I then tended to avoid her, I probably made the affair easier, but I could hardly stand to be in the same room with her for any length of time. I usually came home late and left early, my frustrations taken out on a punching bag at the gym. Under the supervision of a personal trainer, I dropped that extra 10 pounds I had carried around the last 5 years, and then dropped another 10 as I shaped up even more. I don't think Nora noticed. Certainly, she never saw me naked. I replaced my suits with custom-tailored ones, and my new physical fitness seemed to give me more confidence in the courtroom. Not that I needed it much. I had a reputation as a ruthless litigator, but the tone-up and the obvious admiration from some ladies gave me what I thought was an extra edge. Plus, with the hole where my heart had been, I was unstoppable. Oh, don't get me wrong, I wasn't some shark who represented the bad guys. I did some high-profile cases to earn the big bucks, but I also did pro bono work that made my reputation in certain sectors of Chicago as the champion of the little guy or gal. I was proud of my reputation and won some significant judgments against companies who let bad managers or sexual predators abuse their employees. Originally, Robert and the other managing partners expressed some concern about my crusades considering the legal actions were often against their cronies. But the first time I brought in a multi-million-dollar award, I got their attention. I knew from the grapevine. My longtime assistant was wired in and got me a bootleg copy of the minutes of the meeting that the managing partners had debated hotly about the wisdom of giving me a senior partnership. It was Robert Carter who pointed out that if they didn't give it to me, I would probably jump to another firm, and that was something none of them wanted. I wondered about his motivation. Was it because he thought he'd have less access to Nora if I jumped ship? Or was it the fact he was betting Nora that swayed his decision? I guess I'd never know. I knew our daughters would be shocked that I was splitting with Nora. We had twins, Chloe and Emma, who were out on the coast at UCLA on track and field scholarships. They were tall and athletic and got their beauty from their mother and height from both of us. They were going to join us in a few of days for the Christmas holidays. Nora already had our big house in Lake Forest decorated for the holiday, and our annual party guest list read like a who's who of Chicago royalty. Too bad I was going to miss it. Actually, I was happy to miss it. I hated that party, and many of the guests were the kind of politicians that gave Illinois a bad name and kept our prisons full. As things calmed, I adjusted the microphone and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt the festivities, but I promised to be brief." There were a few catcalls and laughs, but the crowd settled finally and mostly gave me their attention. For some reason, Robert's hand was back on the table, and he looked a little peeved. Maybe Nora told him he wouldn't be getting any tonight. Of course, she wouldn't be getting any from me this night, so maybe Robert would get lucky later. I have been with this wonderful firm for my entire working life, and when I made partner, I thought that was the best day of my life. During all the years with the firm, I have made many friends, and it saddened me to see some of them go. Not just because I had trained them so well, but I knew they were going to be using all my tricks against me. That got a quiet chuckle. It has been my privilege to work here and to work for people who understood my commitment to the underdogs of this city. That comment elicited a nice round of applause. Nora again had tears in her eyes. From the adoring look on her face, I could almost believe she cared. Now my work has been recognized with my selection as senior partner. There was more applause, including Nora, who was smiling broadly. And I want to thank all who made this honor possible, including my loving wife Nora, who spent lots of time alone while I was visiting some of Illinois' finest courthouses and penal facilities. She smiled at that. I wondered if she thought about all the times I was alone while she was out screwing around. I also must thank my office wife Carolyn, who puts up with me when I'm not on my best behavior and who is always in my corner. I pointed to Carolyn, a pretty brunette who had been with me the past 10 years. She also had 2 daughters and was devoted to her husband. I envied the guy. She was seated near enough that I could see her blush. Then she gave me an odd look. From that look, I realized that she knew about Nora and Robert Carter, but she had not told me. How could she do that to me? It probably meant that the rest of the office knew that I was a miserable cuck. The hole, where my heart should have been, just got a bit bigger. I kept the smile plastered on my face despite the pain I felt as she was applauded. Years ago, when I was an associate, Mr. Schutz told me a little story about the slaves rowing a first-century galley. The overseer, that's the guy with the whip, says to the slaves, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that the captain has ordered double rations all around." This elicited a cheer from the men. The bad news is that after lunch, the captain wants to go water skiing. Lots of laughs, especially from the associates who knew full well that they were the galley slaves. Now for the tough part of this speech. I'm not going to get a chance to water ski. There were lots of puzzled looks, and it seemed I finally had everyone's attention. Recently, something was confirmed that I had suspected for the last few months. Suddenly, Nora's face showed concern. I knew she was thinking that maybe I had discovered her affair, and she was rolling through all her responses or denials. Her face reddened as I paused. "I have a heart condition." There was lots of buzz around the room, and comments like, "What did he say? And if I don't take care of it immediately, it could prove fatal." Nora's face was a mix of emotions. First, she seemed relieved I hadn't discovered or mentioned her affair, and then as my words sunk in, she wore a look shocked and surprised that I hadn't told her. Finally, she looked furious because the first time she was hearing this supposedly dreadful news was in a very public place, and the announcement to a room full of people. I was surprised when her anger was replaced by a look of sadness. Finally, she just stared at me with a look of disbelief. "I am so sorry that I won't be around to see this firm continue to prosper, and to see the promising men and women seated here tonight become partners themselves. I'm egotistical enough to believe that I still have much to share with many of you. I looked at Robert. His face was blank. Was he regretting my loss to the firm, or thinking about having Nora all to himself now? It no longer mattered. Robert, my resignation is on your desk, and I have assigned my cases to others. It has been an honor to work in this firm, and I appreciate the opportunities I've been given. I wish you all good luck. Thank you and goodbye. There was a stunned silence as I turned away from the lectern and stepped through the curtained backdrop behind me. I then moved to the door concealed by the curtain, one of the doors that the serving staff used which accessed the hallways to the service kitchens on each ballroom floor. Minutes later, I was outside the hotel and walking through the falling snow as it added a new coat to the streets and sidewalks. I turned a corner and went down an alley to meet my ride. I had chosen that spot because there was no security camera there. "Good evening," Mr. Ryan said, a hulking man with a heavy Russian accent. He wore a dark topcoat and held an umbrella as he stood at the open back door of a black Audi A8L. I brushed the snow from my tuxedo jacket and entered the unlighted but warm back seat. "Good evening, Dmitri." In moments we were away, taking a southerly route out of the city that was known to have few, if any, cameras. The heavy snow also helped to obscure any images from the cameras. I was running away, and I didn't want to be found, at least until it was advantageous for me to reappear. I pulled my laptop from the briefcase that was on the seat next to me and logged on, taking the time to closely review my list of things to do. I also made sure that money had been safely transferred to untraceable offshore accounts. I didn't leave Nora destitute, but even if I had, her income from her business would keep her very comfortable. I did not share my end-of-year bonus from the firm with her. This year, she had deserved none of it since she had abrogated her duties as my wife for most of the year. I sent a terse email to my divorce attorney, giving him the go-ahead. Joe Akers was a longtime friend and one of the best of the sharks in the divorce business in town. I doubted Nora would contest the divorce, but it never hurt to have the best hired gun in your corner. I had given him a power of attorney to act in my behalf in all things pertaining to my divorce since I didn't plan to be around. I was going to take some time out of the country to take care of my heart condition, that is my broken heart, the heart that had been given to a beautiful woman who had betrayed me. I also had decided that I needed some time off. I had to admit I was burned out. After 20 years, I couldn't face another day in or out of a courtroom. The failure of my marriage had opened my eyes. I planned to call my daughters once Nora was served with notice of the divorce. I figured she would call them immediately, and my call would be a follow-up explaining why I wouldn't be home for Christmas. She should be served Monday. At least Nora would be able to have the girls with her at Christmas. If everything went as planned, I would be alone having some quiet time, several time zones away. 30 minutes later, we pulled up on a dark street near some industrial-looking buildings on the south side. A figure in dark jeans and a hoodie appeared from an unlighted doorway and joined me in the car. Dmitri moved to the doorway to have a cigarette and to keep watch. This was not the best neighborhood, and even during a snowstorm it paid to be vigilant. The person who joined me was Brendan O'Connell, hacker extraordinaire and former client. He looked 16 but was 23. I had gotten him out of some youthful misadventures and helped his family in some small ways, so I called in a favor. He didn't say anything until he had thrust a worn canvas messenger bag in my hands. "Here's everything you'll need." I could just barely make out his smile in the darkness. I fumbled at the zipper to the bag in the dark and pulled out a cell phone, a tablet computer, and a laptop. "Okay, here's how it works. The cell is a clone of your iPhone and the laptop, your MacBook. I made some changes though. The locator moves each time you use the device. If you would make a call right now, it would seem to be coming from Vancouver, BC. So actually you should wait until at least tomorrow to call." He laughed. "The laptop will randomly send the signal for emails and such through several locations. You can even Skype if you want. I don't think anyone short of NSA could track you, and maybe not even them," he said smugly. "The iPad is just a bonus, something I picked up, but same deal as the laptop for communications. Oh, and that other thing. The complete file on Carter is in a folder labeled Tsunami." And? He laughed. "It was easy. Old Robert has been a real bad boy. No surprise," I said. Of course I had my suspicions, actually more than that. While investigating the affair, the PI I hired had also reported that Robert had been meeting with some very unsavory characters. But I needed the electronic trail that Brendan had provided. Since Robert had started in with Nora, I had been watching him closely, gathering evidence here and there. Were it not for screwing my wife, I might never have tumbled onto him. But once I did, it had become my mission to get him. I could provide a public service. Oh yeah, good old senior partner Robert Carter had been involved in the transfer of over $100 million of mob money through an interesting scheme that involved a number of shell companies which bought goods from Asia from legitimate firms and then sold those items in North America for nice clean money. During the past few years, he's parked over $5 million in offshore accounts. I don't know if that's commission or if he's skimming. How'd you find this stuff? He laughed. Trade secrets. Then he said, well, Mr. Carter, like most people, is a moron when it comes to computer security. I paid a visit to his house and took everything off his home computers, plus the two in his basement. He never bothered to get wiped. Very interesting stuff. What's also interesting is the stuff from his office computer. He was stupid to keep it there. Carter is really dealing with some very bad people. If that $5 million is skimming, and if they find out, they won't be happy. I thought about it. I couldn't say I was really surprised. Robert was a weasel. My gut ached thinking about the photos of him with Nora, but having this information meant that I had his butt. Thanks, I appreciate your great work, I said. In the dark, I could see his smile, and Brendan was having trouble keeping from laughing as he said, the best part is I stole his ill-gotten gains. I moved all the money and closed his accounts. Won't he be in for a surprise when he checks on his nest egg? This time he did laugh. Thanks. It was my turn to smile. Nice work. That's not the best part. All the new account information is on your new computer. You can access it anytime you want. It's yours, man. All yours. Brendan was really quite amused by this gambit. I found myself trying to keep from laughing. It was poetic justice. I had screwed Robert Carter. He would suspect that since I disappeared the same time as his money, I was responsible. He'd just never be able to figure it out. He had my wife, but I had his money. I briefly wondered why he'd get involved with this at all. It wasn't like senior partners weren't paid an obscene amount. Maybe Robert had decided he might want to divorce Isabel and marry Nora. Hard to imagine. And Isabel would take him to the cleaners. Of course, I had heard that a great deal of their wealth was her family money, but still it hardly made sense unless you knew Robert. Yes, Robert would steal from the mob just because he thought he could. I hope you took a finder's fee. Not a chance. Screwing over Carter is reward enough. So if you'll hand over phone and laptop, I'll be on my way. Okay, but I still think you deserve something. He shook his head as I gave him the phone and laptop. Thanks, Brendan. He looked at me for a moment and said with seriousness in his voice, Luke, no thanks needed. For what you did for me. And more importantly, he seemed to choke up. For my mother and sister. I'll always owe you. Good luck, man. As he got out of the car and the snowflakes fell around him, he turned and said, I'll use your phone for parts and I'll get the laptop back where it belongs. It will magically appear in your office, completely wiped, of course. He smiled at me once more, and then he was gone. The car moved south through the snow. I was lost in thought. It seemed that all the tethers to my old life were quickly being stripped away. An hour later, we pulled up in the back of a snow-covered shuttered strip mall in Geary, Indiana. As Dimitri and I walked through the back door of a boarded-up hair salon, we were greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and a smile from Janet Jones, or JJ. She owned a chain of upscale salons in and around Chicago. I had represented her in some actions against ruthless landlords and in a particularly nasty breakup of a partnership. She had, unbeknownst to her, become affiliated with the Chicago mob. I had some contacts and called in some favors, so now she was a successful independent businesswoman. I had also held her hand through a messy divorce 5 years ago and had to arrange for some muscle to encourage her soon-to-be ex to honor the restraining order she had against him. After the divorce, which was handled by Joe Akers pro bono, her ex disappeared, never to be seen again. He just couldn't be convinced to stay away from her. She greeted me with a warm, enthusiastic hug, her energy always making an impression. Janet was strikingly attractive, with raven black hair, tall stature, and sparkling dark eyes that lit up whenever we met. She had been cutting my hair for years, and after I helped her out with a few things, she insisted I no longer pay. Over time, I'd done her several favors, and she made it clear she valued our friendship deeply. Though she hinted at wanting a closer bond, I remained committed to my principles and my love for my wife. I'm so sorry, Luke. If you were my man, well, you know how I feel. Nora's an idiot. I just nodded, feeling her warmth through the sexy, figure-hugging red wool dress. In her heels, she was damn near as tall as my 6'1". Damn, Luke. Never seen you in a tux before. I think you'd better let me go before we embarrass Dimitri. She laughed. I hadn't realized I was holding her so tight or for so long. She felt so good and smelled like heaven. If we had been alone, I could see it in her eyes. She felt the same. Reluctantly, I let her go. She smiled, having felt the bulge in the front of my pants. Janet poured coffee for me and Dimitri and had me sit in the only remaining barber chair in the place. Its brown leather was cracked with age. She put her face close to mine as she loosened and removed my silk bow tie and unbuttoned my collar. It felt as though she was helping me get ready for bed. This only made me more aware of the discomfort in my clothes. For the next hour, she worked on my hair, while Dmitri sat on an old chair in the corner and smoked and read the paper and drank coffee. Christmas music played in the background from a small radio on the shelf. Janet's fingers gave me a sensual message as she cut and trimmed and colored. I realized that I had really missed sex. In my tough mental state the last few months, I had repressed the urges, but now as the pressures of work and a crappy home life melted away, I concentrated on the feelings I was experiencing. Finally, she spun me around to face the old mirror. I couldn't believe the change. My hair was much shorter than I usually wore it, and it was dark, almost black. I liked the style but was not crazy about the color, although I knew it was temporary. Janet, I'm amazed. I hardly recognize myself. That's the idea, isn't it? She smiled at her accomplishment, but her eyes were sad. She touched my hand and said, "You don't have to go. I'd be glad to hide you out at my place up in Wisconsin." I took her hand. "I really do need to go, but I'll be back. You know I don't allow anyone else to cut my hair." She smiled as a tear streaked her cheek. Dmitri brought in a suitcase, and I used the tiny cold bathroom to change into well-worn flannel shirt, khaki cargo pants, and battered work boots. JJ called me chicken for not changing in front of her in the shop. I just laughed. Over the pants and shirt, I wore a camouflage pattern field jacket. An old baseball cap completed the outfit. It wasn't that I couldn't be recognized by someone I knew well. It was just that no one would pay attention. Now I was just another working guy. After a passionate kiss, JJ tearfully let me go and I was on my way again. This time an additional 200-plus miles south to a remote bus station outside St. Louis, Missouri. I shook Dimitri's hand as he let me off on a windy December day, a couple of blocks from the station, just in the off chance they had security cameras there. From there I caught the Big Gray Dog 1,000 miles south to El Paso. My well-traveled passport said I was James Tyler. It was a real passport, and I looked enough like him to pass, but the most serious scrutiny. It was 2 days to El Paso. It had been years since I had traveled by any kind of bus, and now I remembered why. I walked across the border into Ciudad Juarez with hardly a glance at my documents by a bored Mexican official. From there I caught a cab to a small airfield on the outskirts of town. It used to be for business jets when Juarez was a booming manufacturing town before it became the murder capital of Mexico. I had been there a few times myself. There I met my pilot and the battered 172 he flew. No names were exchanged and his fees had been taken care of previously. A few hours later, we were several hundred miles south of Juarez outside Mexico City. The pilot handed me a FedEx envelope and I took out my new passport, travel documents, credit card, and a ticket to Madrid. He handed me a holdall with a change of clothes. I placed James Tyler's passport in the envelope and left it on the seat of the Cessna. A few hours later, I was in the first-class cabin of a 777, heading across the Atlantic to Madrid, final destination Dublin. This time I was carrying a Canadian passport and my name was Luke Turner. After cleaning up in a small airport hotel, my hair was many shades lighter and I was dressed in jeans, white Oxford shirt, and a well-used silk blend blazer, a perfect uniform for an academic on sabbatical from University of BC. It was Wednesday morning in Dublin by the time I landed there, and my next stop was a train station for a trip 178 miles south to the coastal town of Kinsale, which I had selected merely by chance to be my home for the next several months. Nora Ryan's ability to prioritize was one of her best attributes. She could look at a problem or a situation and figure out quickly its importance and then tackle it or move on to something with a higher priority. This made her business a success. But sometimes as two people's careers take off as with hers and her husband Luke, they find less and less time for each other. It just happens. So her ability to prioritize got skewed along the way. In the past at least, her priorities centered on being the best wife and mother, but as her daughters got older and Luke became more successful, and as her business grew, the business she started from home to keep her occupied when her daughters entered high school, she shifted her priorities. Nora would deny it if she was accused of neglecting her husband or daughters. She took care of the household, supervised the staff, and made a heck of a lot of money. But it was undoubtedly true. Her former priorities were wife, lover, and best friend to Luke, mother of twin daughters, the household, and then her catering business and everything else, to the new priority, where her business took over the top spot. Actually, that wasn't quite correct, because as her long-suppressed narcissistic tendencies came to the fore, her top priority became Nora. So in this case, her talent for prioritizing became her worst attribute because she had lost sight of what was most important to her and those she loved. It was Monday mid-morning and Nora sat at her big wood desk in her home office, cosset behind the heavy wooden sliding doors, savoring the first bit of relaxation she had had since last week. and also enjoying the first sips of sweetened hot tea that had just been delivered by her housekeeper Maria. The holidays were her busiest season, and she had already been on the phone constantly since just after 6 a.m. She was mildly agitated about the stupidity of her customers and their demands, and the inefficiency of many of her suppliers. It was nothing new, and it was like this every year. Sometimes she asked herself why she did it. They certainly didn't need the money. Thoughts of Luke and his resignation from the firm intruded. She wasn't ready to think about him yet. He wasn't a priority right now. Even as maddening as it was for upscale caterers like Nora, she thrived in the atmosphere. She enjoyed spending outrageous amounts of other people's money on parties and receptions, and also being able to rub shoulders with Chicago's elite. She had just turned from her laptop as she finished updating the spreadsheets on the upcoming social events that would keep her busy through the beginning of the new year. Now it was time to examine another priority, the one where she was Robert Carter's mistress, or one of his mistresses, she thought ruefully. She frowned slightly. She was no longer Robert Carter's mistress as of Friday night. After Luke's little stunt, and she considered his heart condition a stunt, she had been approached by Robert. He maneuvered her into an empty room and had the nerve to demand a quickie before he joined his wife upstairs in their hotel room. Nora had played the supportive spouse, trying to convince him she bought into Luke's heart story and needed to be with him right now. She also knew that she would get no satisfaction from such a coupling, and she rarely did these days. At first, Nora had enjoyed the dalliance, and that was what she considered it. But then Robert became more demanding, treating her like a 304, using her simply for his pleasure and humiliating her with raw dominating sex he seemed to crave. Robert was really a pig, and why she entered into the affair with him in the first place was somewhat of a mystery. Robert was a smooth operator, and a few months ago when Luke was working some particularly long hours, Robert had become quite attentive. He had taken every opportunity to flatter her, and they met for lunch a few times for the ostensible purpose of having Nora cater an upcoming party at Robert and Isabel's home. He had actually managed to maneuver her to their big house where he plied her with wine and skillfully seduced her. Of course, Nora knew what she was doing and had been curious for some time what made Robert tick. He was a powerful man, powerfully built, who seemed to be unable to take no for an answer. Robert typically got what he set out to get, and Nora was someone he told her he had lusted after for some time. At first, she appreciated the attention and the experience. Robert suggested she wear the most flattering lingerie, and she was relieved that he was physically different from Luke, as it made the experience more comfortable for her. She felt more at ease, as the situation was less overwhelming than some past experiences. But of course Luke loved her, and he was so solicitous, and he made sure she was always well prepared for him. Robert often took a decisive approach with her, moving quickly to achieve his goals. At first, Nora adapted quickly, finding some satisfaction in the intensity, even when she didn't have much time to fully prepare. However, over time, Nora grew tired of this and started yearning for the more gradual, intimate experiences she had with Luke. She began using more personal care products before seeing Robert. On some level, Nora convinced herself that the affair with Robert might help Luke advance his career, knowing that Robert held the key to becoming a senior partner. Luke had eventually achieved his goal, but he had resigned despite the promotion and Nora's involvement. Why had he made that choice? She pushed those thoughts aside. Friday night, as Robert persisted in his demands to have sex with her, she had finally told him they were through, and if he continued then she would go to Isabel. Robert had only looked at her, gauging her seriousness, and perhaps because of Luke's resignation, seemed to accept her decision. Nora still didn't trust him, but was relieved that the affair was over. Thoughts of Luke and last Friday evening intruded. As they prepared for the party in their hotel suite, she had watched him as he got out of the shower, and she had been shocked by his appearance. When had he become so buff and sexy? All their married life, Luke had kept himself fit, but he had a runner's body, long and lean. He had kept up his shoulders with daily laps in the pool too, but he had never looked like he did now. My God, she thought. When did that happen? He had added inches to his chest and arms, and his waist had diminished, and his stomach rippled with washboard abs. At 45, he was sculpted and toned and wonderfully muscular. She also noted he had an overall tan. Nora tried to think about the last time she had seen him naked. It had to have been months ago. She tried to remember the last time he had initiated sex, or they had even spent any time together. She couldn't remember. What had happened? Nora couldn't shake the thought that something had changed with Luke. Over the past few months, he had focused on improving himself, hitting the gym and transforming his physique. His tailored tuxedo, sleek and modern, highlighted his toned frame, making him look younger and more vibrant than ever. She couldn't help but wonder if these changes were meant for someone else, someone new in his life. As she watched him, Nora resolved to remind him of the connection they shared and to prove that she was every bit as captivating as ever. She teased him by rolling the sheer stockings up her legs and attaching them to a garter belt. She knew he loved her in those garments, although for some reason she hadn't worn them, at least for him in quite a while. Robert had insisted, of course. He said it made her more available to him, and in a way, that was true. No distractions would come between them or interrupt their connection. That night, Nora had subtly hinted to Luke that she wasn't wearing her usual undergarments, hoping to catch his attention with the idea of spending more time together after the party downstairs. However, she noticed an unexpected look from him. Was she no longer interesting to him in that way, and was he now indifferent to spending time with her? Nora prided herself on spending a lot of time at the gym and at the pool and at the yoga studio, and in the fact she had maintained the same weight as the day they were married. She still turned heads. Well, hadn't she landed the most important member of the firm? That was a laugh. Robert was a notorious skirt chaser and supposedly would screw anything in a dress and heels. Those mid-Monday morning thoughts opened another door. Why hadn't he told her about his selection as senior partner? Of course, he had known days in advance. That was standard practice. Still, they had always shared everything. Although the selectee was sworn to secrecy until the announcement party, it was common to share the news with a spouse. Becoming a senior partner was a major career milestone for Luke, so why had he kept it from her? She found herself wondering if he had confided in someone else, perhaps inappropriately, just as Robert Carter had once shared similar news in the midst of his own indiscretions. Her mind briefly wandered to the memory of Robert and the peculiar details that had stuck with her, though she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Where was Luke anyway? When he had left after his speech, he had disappeared behind the curtains and had not reappeared. At the time, Nora thought perhaps he didn't want to face the questions, or perhaps the expressions of sadness and sympathy of his friends and colleagues, and had gone to their hotel room. He wasn't there when she arrived, having been delayed by Robert's proposition and the expressions of sympathy from Luke's colleagues. If he did have a heart condition, why had he not told her? He hadn't, had he? She had been pretty preoccupied between work and her affair with Robert, but she was sure she would have remembered. Images of his body intruded again as she sat at her desk. She gazed out at the snow-covered lake forest landscape. She mused that a man who had worked that hard to get into that shape certainly did not have a heart condition. Could he? Nora had finally given up waiting at the hotel Friday night, and somehow thinking he might have gone home, she had a limo take her there. The limo had been slowed by the snow, but she finally arrived just before 2 a.m. The house looked like a Christmas card. Between the snowy yard and all the decorations, it was perfectly and tastefully decorated. Each year, she spent a great deal of money hiring people to decorate. She was proud that her home was the showcase of the neighborhood. As soon as she walked in the door, she knew he had not been there. The place was cold with the lowered thermostat, and there were no familiar sounds or smells. The gas fire in the dining room was unlit. She thought about the times they had made love in front of that fireplace. So she spent what was left of the night alone in their bed. This was all unusual behavior for Luke. Actually, the whole scenario was unusual. Keeping secrets from her, an announcement that affected them both made in public, disappearing without any word. She had called his cell phone as she traveled home, but there was no answer, not even voicemail. Had he decided to spend the night with his mistress? Was this Luke's farewell to her as well as the firm? Nora had dragged herself out Saturday morning, but hardly had time to consider the situation further. Luke always got up first on Saturdays and got the coffee brewing. Many times that was the only time together on Saturdays, since she often had appointments. She wondered if he ever suspected those Saturdays over the months when she was going to meet Robert. Nora had been very careful. Anyway, Luke was not a priority that day. She had a charity ball to cater in the evening, and her personal assistant was at the door by 8 a.m. She hardly had a chance to give a thought, much less a phone call, the rest of Saturday. She didn't arrive home until well after midnight. She was very tired, but it did register that Luke was not there, nor was there any evidence that he had been. She went to bed. There was nothing in her married life that had prepared her for this. Hadn't she been a good wife? They had raised 2 wonderful daughters. Wasn't Luke happy? Wasn't she a good lover? She never denied Luke anything, but there was this nagging suspicion that she had overlooked something. She put it out of her mind. Sunday was going to be another busy day, and her business took priority. On Sunday, she was gone by mid-morning to cater a brunch, followed by a house party in Highland Park. Again, she dragged in dead tired and went to bed compartmentalizing her job and her success over the weekend with hardly a thought to Luke. As Nora sat at her desk, thoughts of Luke upsetting her Monday morning concentration on her business, her phone rang, jolting her back into the present. She picked it up, but it wasn't Luke. Hello. Nora. It's Max. Just a reminder we're meeting at 11 despite the snow, right? She listened to the voice on the phone, and then she snapped. Of course I'll be there. Why had she done that? Probably not enough sleep. Normally calls and requests to solve problems just energized her. She needed to get her priorities straight. Lots of people were depending on her to make their holiday parties perfect. She had never failed to deliver in the past. Luke's absence returned to her consciousness. I need to quit thinking about him. I have no time, she thought. Nora was a bit angry and frustrated that his absence was affecting her concentration and her work. If he wants to take off with his mistress for a few days, so be it, she thought. I don't have time to deal with him and all this right now anyway. It didn't make her feel any better thinking that during her busy season, they didn't see much of each other anyway. Luke knew their daughters would arrive any day, and he never missed Christmas, so he would certainly return before then. Her phone chimed at her. It was a text from her personal assistant. The snowstorm had delayed arrival of fresh flowers, and she was going to have to find another source for the coming events. Thoughts of Luke were banished for the time being. About 30 minutes later, she heard the door chime. Nora figured it was a delivery man. She and Luke always had a FedEx or UPS package on their porch for one or the other. She would let Maria get the door if it was important enough that it had to have a signature. The bell chimed again, and she heard Maria's footsteps on the parquet floor outside her office as she went to answer the door. Soon she heard Maria's quiet tap-tap on her door and called out for her to enter. I'm sorry, Sonora Ryan, but he said he had to deliver the package to you personally. Nora saw a young man standing slightly behind Maria. He was bundled against the cold, and he was holding a large manila envelope. Mrs. Ryan? Yes, she replied. He stepped into her office and put the envelope on her desk in front of her. She picked it up. It was cold. And then he said, You've been served. What? I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm only the messenger. Nora could only sit, paralyzed, holding the cold envelope, her mind blank, failing to understand. Slowly it dawned on her what this envelope might mean. She was amazed to see her hands were so steady as she opened the envelope with her silver opener. Her insides were quaking. She pulled the papers from their container. There were surprisingly few. At the top corner it said, in the matter of Ryan, Luke had filed for divorce. Her neatly constructed world shrunk to the size of that page as she read that he had filed this day a petition for divorce from Nora Ryan, citing irreconcilable differences. Nora knew she should be angry, but she felt numb. This was really all she needed to confirm Luke's involvement with another woman. So involved that he would divorce her after 25 years. Here was another secret he had kept from her. She knew Luke still loved her. Perhaps this was his way of getting her attention. Yes, that must be it, she thought. She had been a good wife and mother, but perhaps she had not been good enough. Had she somehow neglected him? She thought about that, hardly noticing the other two in the room. She had been awfully busy the last couple of years, and then there was the affair with Robert Carter. But she knew with certainty that hadn't changed how she felt about Luke. Robert was just a diversion. She loved Luke. She had always loved him. The knowledge of his love was a constant in her life. It was her strength. It allowed her to be herself and to be the hard-nosed businesswoman she had become. Luke would do anything for her. She also knew that he knew she loved him. Wasn't it obvious? Could he ever doubt her love? The young man coughed, distracting her from her train of thought. This must be a mistake, she said. Ma'am, as I said, I'm just the delivery guy. You need to contact your lawyer or something. She looked at him, realizing that she had spoken aloud. He turned to go and then stopped and stood in the doorway. I almost forgot. There's a message. I was told to tell you that he hopes you will be happier with Robert Carter. What did you say? She gasped, her voice almost inaudible for the sudden constriction in her throat. Just what I said, Mrs. Ryan. The message was quite specific. She watched him remove a small piece of yellow paper from his coat pocket. I wrote it down. You can see for yourself. He moved back into the room, holding the paper out to her. She looked at it like it was a viper. The young man shrugged and read from the small paper. I hope you will be happier with Robert Carter. He then placed the paper on the corner of her desk. She couldn't take her eyes off of it. As the young man walked toward the door, Nora felt as if she was in a terrible nightmare. What had he meant by those words? How could she ever be happy with Robert? It was absurd. Then it dawned on her that Luke knew. He knew she had been having an affair with Robert, despite her attempts to conceal it. He was divorcing her not because of his affair, but because of hers. It was just a misunderstanding, that's all. She loved Luke, not Robert. And Luke loved her. How could this happen? Her carefully constructed world began to crumble, but she was determined not to let it. Maria escorted the young man to the door and then returned. Can I get you anything, Sonora? Nora just looked at her, then replied, No, but thank you anyway, Maria. Please close the doors. Don't forget I have a meeting at 11, so I won't be here for lunch. Yes, Sonora. I'm sorry. Maria closed the sliding doors. Nora sat thinking. So the riddle of Luke's disappearance was now solved. That meant it was no longer a distraction. She also knew he would not miss Christmas with the girls so they could talk then. Divorce? How ridiculous. She loved Luke, and he loved her. Her phone rang, and she went back to work. May I help you, sir? I was already taken aback by her beauty as I walked into the small real estate office on Main Street in Kinsale, but when she said those words it was as if an angel had spoken. Well, that is if an angel had an Irish accent. She had dark, shoulder-length auburn hair, striking emerald eyes, and a fair, radiant complexion. She was dressed in a festive red cashmere sweater that complemented her appearance. The rest of her was obscured by a medium-sized antique-style wooden desk, its center covered with a green felt blotter and topped with a laptop computer. Air. Yes. I'm looking for a place to rent for the next 6 months, maybe longer. Her eyes sparkled at my seeming discomfort. I didn't know if she had this effect on all men, but she certainly caused me to be tongue-tied. And that was quite an accomplishment considering I had been involved in hundreds of trials and faced my share of juries and judges, plus I'd given numerous presentations and speeches in public forums. Yes, quite an accomplishment indeed. She seemed amused and I smiled at her. Then she got up and moved around to the front of the desk. I was stunned. With the red sweater, she wore a dark green pencil skirt which came to just below her knees, a thin corded belt and dark hose and black pumps with a very high heel. She was tall, and I guess you could describe her as willowy, and in the heels we were looking eye to eye. Gobsmacked, the Brits say. I certainly was. I'm Sophia Barrett. She held out her hand. And you are? Her hand felt so warm in mine. I might have imagined the spark that passed between us at the touch. I stood holding her hand, not wanting to let go. Finally I did. The look of amusement was still there, but also something else. I'm Luke. I'd almost forgotten my new persona. Luke Turner. I could smell her perfume. I didn't know what she was wearing, but it was intoxicating. Of course, the same perfume smells different on every woman, because of body chemistry and all. I'd almost forgotten what it was like to meet a woman in a business atmosphere who was wearing perfume. It was a sad state that in 21st century America most offices were scent-free zones. Very sad. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Turner. I think we can assist you. Please have a seat. She indicated the wooden chair in front of her desk. She turned and moved back to her place at the desk. The view going away was as spectacular as it was coming. Her legs were spectacular. I sat, watching her watch me with that amused expression again, although I did detect a bit of color in her cheeks. Then she turned away as she consulted her laptop. She was probably no older than 30, but she looked very young, probably the complexion. I also noticed there was no sign of a wedding or engagement ring. I chided myself. Here I was on sabbatical from my former life, and the last thing I needed was to get involved with a young woman, and one no doubt 15 years or more my junior. Well, she was wonderful to look at, I had to admit, and just because I was only starting the process to end my marriage, it didn't mean I wasn't allowed to look. This time of year, we typically have lots of vacancies since not many feel the need to be by the Irish seaside in the winter. She smiled as she said it. Will Mrs. Turner be joining you? She added, looking up from her laptop. No, I said and left it at that. I think she caught the sound and look of sadness I could not mask. She paused and gave me an appraising look and then returned to her computer screen. So perhaps an apartment in town? I shook my head. I would rather be somewhere quiet. I don't have a car, so perhaps within a mile walk from shopping and such. She looked at me for a moment and said, There is shopping in town, of course, but not much and such until the spring. It's pretty quiet here. That's what I'm looking for. I'm on sabbatical from university, and I'm trying to do some writing, so perhaps a cottage, with a view of the water for inspiration? Sounds lovely, I replied. She stood. I think I know the perfect place. Mind a walk? Actually, I would enjoy a walk. I felt like adding with you. If you will excuse me for a moment then. She grabbed a large tote and moved toward the back of the office. While I waited, I looked over the place. Lots of Christmas decorations and creche in the front window. Everything was very tidy, either because Ms. Barrett was very neat or perhaps because business was slow this time of year. When she came back to the front of the shop, I was stunned again by her beauty. Now she was wearing skinny jeans that outlined her legs almost as well as the stockings had, low-heel black boots, and carrying a shearling and leather bomber jacket. It also looked like she had applied fresh lip gloss. I jumped from the chair in time to help her with the jacket, getting another dose of the scent she was wearing. My gesture got me a thank you and a brilliant smile which made my heart race. Stop it, I told myself. She locked up the office and we set off in the brisk December air, walking toward the harbor. The clouds threatened rain. It didn't take us long to walk out of the small town. Kinsale has only about 2,000 people. Her long legs matched me stride for stride. We followed the curving bay and took a quiet lane in the direction of the sign that said, Charles Fort. As we walked, she told me a little about the town and its economy, fishing, yachting, and tourists mostly. American? She asked. No, actually Canadian. I hated lying to her. I've met a fair number of Canadians. You seem more American. I've lived in the States a fair bit, may have picked up some bad habits. I laughed. She smiled. In what I estimated to be about a mile, we reached the village of Summercove. It was a picturesque Irish village with a small harbor overlooking the estuary where the River Bandon meets the sea. Many of the houses were gray slate from local quarries. She pointed out the Bowman Bar and recommended it as a good place to eat and drink. If you have a mind to, of course. She frowned at the and drink. I suspected there was a story behind that. Not far off on the hill overlooking the village and the harbor was Charles Fort. It's one of the best preserved of the star forts in Europe, built in the 17th century by the British. She explained as we started up the hill just past the village. It was an impressive-looking place. About halfway up the hill to the Fort Sophia led us on a dirt track that angled away from the village and harbor. Ahead of us near the top of the hill was a simple white house, perhaps best described as a large cottage, and to its left was a smaller white-painted stone cottage with a slate roof. No thatch roof, I thought, remembering Robert Wayne and The Quiet Man. Shortly we reached the cottage, and she opened the red-painted wood door. I noticed there was no lock. Had I ever lived in a place without the ability or need to lock the door? I didn't think so. Sophia found the switch inside the door and turned on a single overhead light which was off to the right in the kitchen. The inside of the cottage was sparsely furnished. A large cloth-covered vintage-looking easy chair and a table next to it plus a coffee table were all the furniture in the small living room. The floor was covered by a faded oval hooked rug. There was a fireplace which I hoped was not the only source of heat, but it did look like it could hold an inviting fire. An old wooden table and 2 chairs sat in the corner of the small kitchen. I noticed a stove and refrigerator, a small sink, and several high glass-fronted cupboards. I'm sorry for the chill. There's quite an efficient gas heater. Just doesn't make sense to keep the place warm without anyone here. I watched her move to a rotary switch on the wall near an archway to the left of the fireplace that led to a hallway which appeared to run along the front of the house, perhaps to a bath and a bedroom. It should be warm in no time, she said. I loved her smile. The bedroom is back this way. She indicated the hallway. Did I detect a blush as she said that? It was hard to tell in the dim afternoon light coming through the front windows of the living or sitting room. I followed her through the archway past a surprisingly well-appointed bath to the single bedroom located at the end of the hall. There was an antique 4-poster double bed there with nightstand and lamp, and a battered-looking dresser. The bed was covered with a well-worn quilt that was certainly handmade. As we left the bedroom, she pointed into the bath and said, "Lots of hot water too." We walked back to the living room and I gazed across the water at another 17th century fort, and then at the harbor below. This was exactly the place I needed. Sorry, no television or Wi-Fi. There's a shop in the village that can set you up if needed. Gas and electric are the responsibility of the renter, and there's a separate meter. Water and rubbish collection is included. I turned to her. I'll take it. I like a man who's decisive, but how do you know if you can afford it? She teased. I don't think you'd have brought me here, a poor academic, if you thought I couldn't. Plus with the season and probably no rent until spring at the earliest, I'm sure the owner is anxious to rent it. That caused a frown. I hated to see her frown. Did she know the owner? Was it someone who had fallen on hard times? I do know the owner, and even though it's not currently rented, she won't let it go for a song. She smiled again. It was like sun breaking through clouds. I returned her smile. Okay, I don't mind being taken advantage of. I will take it, and for at least 6 months. Mr. Turner. Please call me Luke. Luke. She took in a breath and said quickly, it will be 1,000 euros per month, with the first month and an equal amount for a damage deposit due immediately. I did the math quickly. That amounted to about $1,300 US per month. Not an outrageous sum, especially since it appeared the perfect spot for me. I had no worries in the money department anyway, and would have gladly paid twice that. I smiled and said, agreed. Her relief was palpable. What was her connection to this place, or did this rental amount to a tidy commission, especially since I agreed to 6 months? Well then, when would you like to occupy? Since all my worldly possessions are back at your office and I've not made arrangements for lodging for tonight, how about today? Oh dear, she said. Is there a problem? I don't know if I can get the cleaning crew today. Don't worry about that. I'm perfectly capable of doing a bit of cleaning myself. You're sure? Without a doubt. I hated for us to leave. The furnace was starting to warm the place nicely. I wanted to ask her to stay for a drink or a cup of coffee or tea, but of course I had little furniture and no supplies. As we left, a large collie rushed up to Sophia, wagging her tail madly. "Molly, are you being a good girl today?" "Luke, this is Molly. She's the watchdog for the property. Be nice to her. You're okay with dogs, aren't you? She might want to adopt you. She does that with most tenants." I scratched Molly's ears. "Yes, I do like dogs. Just haven't been around one for a while." I remembered growing up in a big house on the north side of Chicago that was full of kids, and there was always a dog and at least one cat around. "Molly, you're invited to drop by any time." As we walked back into town, Molly at our heels, I got information about the local shops and where I might buy some linens and other household items and groceries. Fortunately, they all delivered. When we got back to her office, I paid Sophia the damage deposit, and her eyes widened as I gave her an additional €6,000 to pay for my entire stay. I figured whoever she represented needed the money, and Sophia undoubtedly needed the commission. I signed the lease documents without reading them, some lawyer I was. I didn't pay attention to who the lessor was, but noticed Sophia signed for the owners. She looked at the euro notes on the green blotter on her desk and seemed in shock. Then suddenly she looked at her watch. "Oh dear, Lila, I've got to go. I'm sorry to run off, Luke, but I've got to get to the bank and then pick up my daughter Lila at school." Just my luck, I thought. Just when I was going to ask Sophia to dinner, I discover she has a daughter. Was a husband lurking somewhere too? As beautiful as Sophia was, I had no doubt there was a man in her life. Oh well, I thought, probably for the better. I was going to be a single man soon enough, and plenty of time to go out to dinner with beautiful women. That thought surprised me. During my halfway around the world odyssey, I had lots of time to think about my situation, and I had promised myself that I would stay away from women, and I vowed to never fall in love again, never to be vulnerable. Good advice, I thought grimly. It saves wear and tear on the heart. Sophia locked the door to her office and shook my hand. The tingle was not my imagination, and she headed down the street, followed closely by Molly. Maybe after a bit of shopping, I'd try the Bowman for dinner, and then see if the cottage owners were at home to at least introduce myself, since I was to be their tenant for the next 6 months. But first I needed an internet connection. I guess I could have asked Sophia if I could have used the one in her office, but she was in a hurry. So with coffee in mind and a sudden hunger, I followed my nose a short distance down Main Street to a cafe which had a sign tucked in the window that said Internet. After ordering a large bowl of seafood chowder and coffee from a comely blonde with an Eastern European accent, I logged on. My mailbox was bursting, mostly with work-related questions, and of course with lots of messages with condolences and regrets at my leaving. But I was only looking for 3 messages, and I found 2. The first from Joe Akers, which informed me Nora had been served 2 days ago, on Monday, and the second which simply said, "Tsunami received. I owe you, Mike." I quickly scanned the rest, looking again for one from Nora. There was no email from her. I figured that she would have tried to call, but since my phone had not been on since I left Chicago, she would resort to email. I was mistaken. Reluctantly, I turned on my new phone and accessed the missed call directory. Like the emails, there were dozens of calls, but the 3 from Nora were all from last weekend. Nothing since she had been served with the divorce papers. Odd, I thought. It was also odd that she had not left a voicemail. Did she even care I was gone? Had she noticed? Puzzling. Had she been so furious with me, or tired of me, she was just going to let the divorce go ahead? Why not? She had betrayed me and gotten caught. She might just now have what she wanted, her freedom. The freedom to screw Robert or anyone else whenever she wanted without regard to the consequences to her marriage. Nora was a beautiful, successful woman who would not want for male companionship. That thought saddened me. I fought back the self-pity, knowing it wasn't productive. My marriage was over. What reaction had I expected from Nora? But I had expected a reaction. A reaction of regret and remorse was what I was aiming for, not indifference. So much for the best laid plans. What the hell was I doing in Ireland anyway? I ate my late afternoon lunch, hardly tasting a thing. My computer connecting me to the world I had tried to escape. My thoughts awhirl. Should I just get on a plane and go home and have it out with Nora and pack and move out? Damn, this was not going the way I had expected. But I had signed a 6-month lease, and Kinsale seemed the ideal location. A picturesque village on the southern coast of Ireland where I could hide away. I had come here because I did need time away, time to grieve my marriage and to heal my heart, and time to rest. I suddenly felt as tired as I had been in my life. Nora had dictated my life and emotions too long. Now I was going to move on, and I was going to stay in Ireland and just do nothing for a while. From all the travel, I was exhausted, but I also now felt a desperate weariness in my soul. As I walked the Christmas-decorated streets of Kinsale in the late fall afternoon darkness, messenger bag over my shoulder and wheeled cabin bag rolling behind me. I thought maybe with time and distance I could recover from my heart condition. Kinsale might just be the place. Sophia Barrett was sorry to part company with Luke Turner. He was a handsome and personable man, and from all indications a wealthy one. She was also sorry to have taken advantage of him as far as the rent for Mary's cottage went, charging him at least twice what it was worth during low season. She'd take that up with Father Seamus at confession next time. But the money now clutched tightly in her hand was an answer to her prayers. A month's rent plus damage deposit would have been a great help, but 6 months plus deposit was a gift from heaven. This very morning she had been on the verge of having to close the real estate business that she owned with her sister Fiona. But now she could pay the back rent on the office, plus she had enough money to keep the business open and food on the table, and pay her daughter's school expenses until the tourists returned in the spring. She hurried into Michael Connolly's small printing shop. He was her landlord, a kindly 70-year-old who she had known all her life. He was surprised to see her, and especially to see her smile. Those smiles had been few the last few months. He knew her business, like most of the real estate offices in town and across Ireland, had struggled since the economy went into the tank in late 2008. "Mr. Connolly, I've come to pay the back rent." "Are you sure, Sophia?" He was aware of her situation, being a widow and all with a young daughter, and had not pressed the issue of rent. He was astounded as she pulled 1,500 euros from a stack of notes in her hand and put them on his old ink-stained desk. "Hadn't heard you'd won the sweepstakes, Sophia." He laughed. "No, but I did rent Mary's cottage for 6 months, and he paid the entire amount in advance," she said excitedly. "Well, congratulations. A foreigner, I take it?" He knew few Irish who would put up 6 months' rent when 2 would suffice. "A Canadian, actually. Gotta run, make a few stops, and then get Lila at school." She left in a swirl of good humor and delicious-smelling perfume, which left Connolly wishing he was 30 years younger. He smiled as he put the bills away, thinking about how much merrier Christmas would be this year for his family with this unexpected gift from heaven. Sophia retraced her steps of the morning and returned to Summercove to pick up her daughter at school. She made stops along the way at the gas and electric to square her bills, and then to the bank to make a deposit. By the time she reached the school, Luke Turner was already known around town as that rich Canadian who had rented Mary's cottage, mostly because of Mr. Michael Connolly's inability to keep from passing gossip. Later that evening, Sophia sat on the corner of her sofa sipping herbal tea and watching the bright fire that warmed her living room. It was about 8 and Lila was tucked in bed and she was settled in, legs covered by a throw her mother had made. Next to her was the black kitten Aisling, who had wandered in one morning at the beginning of fall and had stayed. She was a loving cat and a ferocious mouser. The rain had started in earnest, and she hoped Luke, and that was how she thought of him, was spending a comfortable evening. She knew he was home. She had seen him arrive in a taxi about 6:30. In the faint light from the doorway, he and the driver unloaded a number of parcels from the boot. She had briefly thought about inviting him for dinner, but about that time, she saw him head down the track, most likely for a meal at Bowman's. She was somewhat relieved since she had had no time to shop, and there was little suitable in the house. Of course, now that she had money again, she would stock up, and perhaps she and Lila would have a meal out once in a while, and they wouldn't have porridge each morning and soup and bread each evening. Never mind the fact that Lila never complained. She was a lovely child, and Sophia felt blessed to have her. She frowned at thoughts of her late husband Sean, now gone just 4 years. Mostly he was a loving man who doted on his daughter, but he was terrible when he drank, and drank he did. Early in their marriage, he had limited his drinking and almost stopped altogether when she was pregnant with Lila, but it seemed shortly thereafter he changed and his drinking increased. She blamed it in part to his brother Ethan. They owned a fishing boat together, and Ethan had never married. He tended to be selfish and immature, but he was the older brother. Then one night Sean came home in a terrible temper, and that was the first time he hit Sophia. If her parents had been alive, she might have left him on the spot. Of course, like most abusers, he felt terrible remorse and tried to make it up to her. And just when she thought it wouldn't happen again, Sean would go out drinking with his brother and come home and call her degrading names and want to have sex, and when she resisted his drunken attempts, he would hit her. For years ago, Ethan and Sean took the boat out knowing the fish were running, but also that there was the potential for a serious storm. Sean never came back. Lila was only 2 and hardly missed her father, and Sophia felt such a sense of relief at Sean's death. She went to the rectory and had a long discussion with Father Seamus. Of course, as the parish priest, Father Seamus knew about their marital troubles, so he was not surprised by her feelings. He was also a wise man who let Sophia work out her grief and mixed feelings. With the little insurance money, she and her sister set up a real estate office. It was a time in late 2007 that houses were selling briskly and prices just continued to go higher in the overheated real estate market in coastal Ireland. Fiona and Sophia were smart enough to put some money away for possible lean times. But those times came too soon. Fortunately, their rental property sideline became their lifeline. Occasionally houses still sold, but those commissions were few and far between. Now Sophia again had money in the bank and her bills were up to date. She had inherited the house and Mary's cottage from her parents. The cottage was named after her grandmother who lived there as a widow for 40 years. The only cloud on her horizon was Ethan. He was a great brute of a man who seemed to have decided that Sophia had married the wrong brother. Actually, Sophia had rebuffed his advances before her marriage to Sean. Certainly it seemed that Ethan was the cause of many of the problems in her marriage. After Sean was lost, Ethan somehow got the impression that Sophia would welcome him in Sean's place. There could be nothing farther from the truth. She tried not to hate Ethan, but his smirking face and unwelcome overtures and his drinking angered and frightened her. He let it be known around the town that she was his woman, and Sophia suspected that he had discouraged more than one prospective suitor. It wasn't that Sophia wanted to remarry, but that was her choice, not Ethan's. Her gaze shifted to the side window where she could just see Mary's cottage and noticed the lights in the windows. She did smile at the thought of the man there. What kind of man was Luke Turner? He did not wear a wedding ring, but at her mention of Mrs. Turner at the office earlier, she could not miss the fleeting look of deep hurt. He seemed so nice and very intelligent, except perhaps for how he let her take advantage of him on the rent. Her conscience struggled with that, but the warm feeling of security for the first time in months banished those thoughts. The next morning, as she got Lila ready for school, she happened to glance out the window and see Luke leave the cottage and set off for a run. She shivered for him as she noticed his attire. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and wool cap and running shorts and trainers, but his legs were bare. She had met any number of Canadians and knew they were a hardy breed. But nonetheless, it was not the attire she would choose for her morning run. The rain had let up and it promised to be a dry day, rare enough for Ireland in the winter. At least he wouldn't be running in the rain. At about 9:30, Sophia got an unexpected surprise. She had just gotten herself situated, and the office opened when Luke Turner walked in. This time he was dressed more for the weather in an open canvas coat with leather collar, a cable-knit fisherman's sweater and heavy cotton cargo pants and sturdy leather boots. He looked much more rested than he had the day before, but there was still a guarded look on his face. She had seen that look yesterday off and on, but had put it down to jet lag and being a stranger in an unknown place. Sophia was happy she'd taken extra care with her appearance this morning, wearing a dark fitted skirt, a cream turtleneck sweater, and black high-heel boots. She smiled at him, and suddenly his face brightened as he smiled back. She unsuccessfully tried to dampen the excitement she felt in his presence, chiding herself that it was just silly for a grown woman with a 6-year-old daughter to be mooning after a man she had just met and who she really knew nothing about. She did feel her face flush as he moved toward her. Sophia, she loved the way he said it with his North American accent. "Do you have a moment?" She nodded, suddenly concerned that after spending the night at Mary's cottage, he had come to ask for his money back. No, she thought the smile that she hoped she had caused gave him away. She tried to quash those schoolgirl thoughts, but without success as his eyes seemed to light up as she stood to greet him. "Of course, please do come in, Mr. Turner." "Sophia, please do call me Luke." "Very well, Luke." She liked the sound of his name. "How may I help you?" "I thought I'd drop in to ask if the landlord would have any objection to me buying some additional furnishings for the cottage." Sophia blushed, knowing her little deception was over. Why had she not told him straight away that she owned the cottage? "I think the landlord would have no objection at all." She smiled. "Good. Well, that's settled then." He looked like he was ready to leave. "I'm sorry I didn't make it clear right from the start that I'm your landlord. I just didn't want you to think." "Well, now, I don't really know what I expected you to think." Her voice trailed off. He moved to her, and as he approached, she had a vision of his lean and fit body, at least what she had seen of it under his running gear. "Guess I should have read the contract more closely," he said as he took her hand. That spark she felt yesterday was there again. "It wasn't a fluke. But everyone in town knows I'm renting your cottage, it seems." He laughed. Sophia loved his laugh, as open and enthusiastic as a boy. She had seen flickers of a fine sense of humor the day before, but had not heard him laugh. Well, yes, that's the way of it in a small town, especially in the low season. People don't have the sense to mind their own business. It was her turn to laugh. "I really don't care if the town knows. I expect there's a great deal of envy that I'll be living next door to the prettiest woman in Kinsale." She laughed along with him, but blushed at the idea he found her attractive. Plus, had I known you were the landlord, you probably could have doubled the rent, and I would have gladly paid. She winced inwardly but quickly recovered and said, well look, if you decide to renew the lease, I'll keep that in mind. They both laughed. Sophia loved how he made her laugh and how his laugh was so genuine. She wondered later how long they would have stood there holding hands had it not occurred to her to ask about what furnishings he intended to add to the cottage. When she asked, he let go of her hand, to her regret, and said, after spending the night in the bed, I discovered that the mattress was probably for someone smaller and lighter, so I'd like to replace that along with the rug in the living room, and perhaps add a desk and a few other bits of furniture. She was immediately ashamed that she had made the rent so dear, and at the same time not provided a comfortable place to sleep. Luke, that would be fine. He smiled at her. Of course I'll be leaving them behind when I return to Canada, but a few sticks of new furniture and a new mattress will make my stay here more comfortable. The warmth of his smile almost overcame the chill at the thought of his leaving. She didn't want to think about that. Oh, and where would you like the old mattress and rug to be stored? Sophia shook her head. They're hardly family heirlooms, so they can go off with the rubbish. I'll just ask Bennett's to haul them away when they deliver the new items. Bennett's? That's where you're getting furniture? Sophia thought of the upscale furniture store and how much these items would cost. But he did appear to have means enough. Oh yes, Ms. Bennett was very helpful and showed me a number of mattresses and assured me that whatever I chose they would have it in stock. Sophia felt her cheeks warm at the thought of Clara Bennett, with her striking blonde hair and confident demeanor. She could imagine Clara dramatically testing out the display mattresses, rolling back and forth while enthusiastically praising their qualities, though Sophia doubted they had any real merit. Sophia couldn't understand how she'd become so possessive of Luke in a mere 24 hours. It was all nonsense, of course, but on the other hand, she felt like punching Clara Bennett, a woman she'd known since they were in grade school together. He started to leave and turned and said, "Will I see you later tonight?" "Yes, I'll be home. Lila and I will be home." She asked herself why she included that last bit. Well then, until this evening. I hope you have a wonderful day. The office seemed awfully empty when he had gone. A couple of hours later, her sister Fiona whirled in. That was the best description of Fiona's pace. With 3 boys and a husband who was a solicitor in town, Fiona seemed to be always on the go. She was 2 years older than Sophia, but they were so alike in appearance they had been mistaken for twins many times. Today she had on one of her typical expensive outfits, silk blouse, wool skirt, and the latest high heel boots, and topped with a very fashionable tan trench coat. Sophia was lucky that her sister could afford to be such a clothes horse, because she fell heir to any number of slightly worn outfits that Fiona would describe as so last year. Sophia also knew the gift of clothes was part of her sister's generous nature to a sister who was less fortunate. "Just thought I'd pop in and see how you were and tell you about my morning," she said as she placed 2 takeaway coffee cups on the desk, one holding the latest coffee concoction from the shop down the street. Sophia thought she smelled eggnog, the other always the same, a non-fat chai for Sophia. Fiona hung her coat on the hook on the hall tree and settled herself in the chair across the desk from Sophia. Sophia was happy the laptop was turned away from Fiona, so she couldn't see she'd been exploring British Columbia, Luke's home. Why did she have this obsession with the man? He could be an axe murderer for all she knew. No, he couldn't. Someone with those kind eyes was certainly not a criminal of any kind. She turned her attention back to her sister who was watching her. Had she detected her thoughts? "Right after I dropped the boys at school, I ran into Mr. Connolly." Sophia winced knowing what was coming. "He was bubbling over, and he wished me a Merry Christmas and told me you had made up the 3 months back rent." She paused to look at her sister. When no explanation was forthcoming, she went on, "When were you going to tell me you were behind on the rent for this place?" Sophia smiled and quipped, "About the time I was going to have to sleep with Mr. Connolly to make up the rent." Fiona guffawed. Then with a twinkle in her eye she said, "From what I've heard, that might not be too bad." "What are you saying?" "He's old enough to be our grandfather." Sophia laughed. "You need to keep up with the gossip, girl." Apparently old Mr. Connolly was quite the randy one in his day, and there was a lot of jealousy when Maggie landed him. Oh, there's more. When Maggie died about 15 years ago, I think most of the eligible, and maybe a few not so eligible ladies in County Cork decided to pay him a visit. In the 3 years it took Aaron to land him, he had sampled a lot of wares, and to my understanding there was never a complaint. Sophia smiled. "Fiona, where on earth do you hear these things?" "No, don't tell me. I really don't want to know your sources. On another note, I met your benefactor this morning." "Oh, where?" "I was at Bennett's getting that new floor lamp. The one Tom's been eyeing. I'm getting it for him for Christmas, and there he was, Mr. Luke Turner. What a handsome man, I have to say. And of course Clara Bennett was all over him like a little bitch in heat." She even introduced us and she acted like she had met her Prince Charming. Of course, as we know, Clara is not that discriminating about her men. Sophia tried to keep a smile on her face as she thought, surely not Clara Bennett and Luke? She said, I think Luke has better taste than that. Fiona looked at her sister, digesting what she had heard. Luke, is it? Sophia blushed. He did ask me to call him Luke. What? Oh, nothing. Yes, something. Is Luke your Prince Charming? Nonsense. But she felt herself blushing. Fiona sipped her coffee and looked at her sister, picturing her with Luke Turner. I think you'd be well matched. Sophia was not surprised that Fiona said it. She usually spoke her mind, and of course Sophia's daydreams had been about just that, but she protested. I hardly know the man. He's going to be your tenant for the next 6 months, if I heard correctly. That's certainly time enough. Unless Clara Bennett grabs him first. Sophia tried to keep emotion out of her voice. Clara's not his type. Fiona responded. How do you know? She's got big tits and great legs, and she's always been willing. What more could a man want? They both laughed and answered together. Does her father own a pub? Sophia, listen to me. While that slattern was all but spreading herself on the display beds, your Luke, well, I can only describe his look as bemused. He wasn't falling for it. That man has been around a bit, and I think we can figure out a way for you to be the one. Fiona, I'm not so sure. When I asked if Mrs. Turner would be joining him, you should have seen his face. Someone's hurt him badly. Oh, he disguises it well, but I think the reason he's in Ireland is to get far away from her. And if that's the case, then he really does mean to take advantage of the solitude at the cottage. So much the better. You're in the perfect position to help him get over whoever hurt him. Remember, in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Now let's get to work on your wardrobe. A few hours later, Sophia and Lila were in the back of a taxi headed home. It was going on 4 o'clock, and the little sun that had appeared that day was almost gone. This time of year, she knew it would be almost fully dark by 4:30. The short days and clouds and rain made for a miserable winter, but she was glad that this year her Christmas had been made much brighter by a stranger who had appeared like an angel. Sophia had picked up her daughter at school, and they had walked into Kinsale to do some shopping. Loaded down with a king's feast of groceries and a few items that had rarely graced their table in the past months, they were excited to get home, and Sophia had opted for a taxi. It was an extravagant expense, but Sophia knew that there was no way she and Lila have carried all the items they purchased. As she sat in the taxi, unmindful of the magnificent scenery all around, Sophia was thinking about her conversations with Fiona. Her grocery purchases reflected the idea that she would prepare some delicious dinners with Luke as their guest. How had she let Fiona talk her into such a scheme? Actually, it was easy, she mused. She hadn't admitted it to her sister, but she was very much attracted to the tall Canadian. Of course, protests aside, Fiona knew her too well and, as the good-hearted meddler she was, she convinced Sophia that a relationship with Luke was worth exploring. Sophia couldn't help herself as she tingled with excitement. Had it only been yesterday they met? As they crested the hill and approached the house, Sophia was startled to see a scrum of vehicles parked in front of her house and the adjoining cottage. In the rapidly fading light, she saw men on the roof. Had something happened? Had there been an emergency or a fire? No, there was no sign of the fire brigade or the police. What was going on? As they got closer, she could see signs on the various vehicles parked all around. There was one from the cleaning service she used, another from Collins Roofing, and another, and by far the largest, said Bennett's Furniture on its side. As the taxi dodged parked vehicles to get to her door, she also noticed a van with a cartoon character of a chimney sweep on its side and an automobile with a sign on the door that said, Amon's Wireless Service. The taxi had hardly stopped moving before she was out the door heading for the cottage. She called back over her shoulder, Mike, I'll be right back, as soon as I sort this out. The taxi driver helped Lila out and then went around to the boot to unload. Sophia moved to the open front door, dodging a ladder to the roof. It barely registered that the door had been freshly painted. She moved into the front room and was astonished at the changes to the interior. The cottage had been transformed, fresh paint, new furniture, and curtains. But before she could really take it all in, she spotted Clara Bennett and Luke in the kitchen. She saw red as she watched Clara in her short skirt and very high heels reach up and put her arms around Luke's neck and plant a kiss on him that was definitely X-rated. What made Sophia even madder was the fact that Luke was not pushing her away. He actually seemed to be enjoying it. Clara, she could understand. She went after anything in trousers, but Luke, her Luke, how could he? At that point, Luke disengaged, and since he was facing Sophia, he was first to spot her. His expression went from shock to sadness as Sophia spun around and disappeared through the door. She dodged the ladder again and barely avoided Devin Collins, the owner of the roofing company. She hardly registered that he was carrying a folded blue tarp, and that as she went past him he said something about not being able to finish, but that they'd be back first thing tomorrow. She managed to hold her tears until she had paid Mike the driver, but as she walked into the house the tears flowed. She looked at the groceries that had to be put away and thought of the expense of the meal she planned for Luke. "Are you okay, Mommy?" asked Lila. "Yes, dear. I'm sorry, I'm just tired." Lila was a perceptive child and had seen her mother's moods before, but this puzzled her. She had been so excited while they shopped and on the ride home. Lila wondered if the change was due to all the activity at the cottage, or did it have to do with the handsome man who had moved in yesterday? Sophia was in the middle of putting items away in the refrigerator when she stopped. It had just occurred to her that the roof was off the cottage and the place had been painted, and if she had recollected it correctly, the kitchen sported new appliances. Who was going to pay for all those improvements? She certainly couldn't afford to. Luke had misled her with his visit this morning, asking about a few furniture items. Sophia was furious. How dare he? He had engaged an army of workers to do what looked like a major remodel. And on top of it all, he was kissing Clara Bennett in the kitchen of her grandmother's cottage. He was probably over there right now running with that 304 Clara Bennett on his new mattress. Her tears were banished by her fury. How could she have been so stupid? Luke Turner was like all men, not to be trusted. She vowed to have it out with Mr. Luke Turner first thing in the morning, and she hoped that was last time she would have to deal with him for the next 6 months. And Clara Bennett could have him for all she cared. If he was stupid enough to get involved with her, then they deserved each other. Claire Booth Luce said, "No good deed goes unpunished." I'd spent over 12,000 euros furnishing, repairing and refurbishing Mary's cottage, and what did I have to show for it? On the plus side, I now had a home that suited me, filled with comforts like new appliances and furniture, Wi-Fi, and upgraded wiring. The roof no longer leaked and the chimney no longer belched smoke into the front room. And of course there was the scorching kiss from Clara Bennett. Clara was an interesting, intelligent, and quite attractive woman who was also a fantastic decorator and someone who had a great deal of fun with my money. She reminded me in many ways of Nora. They would probably be great friends. As much fun as that kiss was, my internal alarms were clanging furiously by the time it ended. Right now I didn't want any woman, especially another Nora. Well, that wasn't entirely true. And that was my dilemma. Sophia Barrett bothered me. In a good way. I was actually looking forward to getting to know her and her daughter over the coming months. Did I want to spend the rest of my life with her? Of course not. Well, maybe. My emotional state was so out of whack that I hardly knew who I was, much less trying to fathom the inner workings of a beautiful young woman, several years my junior, who just happened to be my landlord. So to the minus side of the equation, I had seen the expression on Sophia's face when she walked in on me kissing Clara. Well, actually Clara initiated the kiss, and I admit I was enjoying the heck out of it. Clara said she wanted to give me a thank you kiss for making her Christmas by allowing her pretty much free rein to transform the cottage. Of course, I also knew that the hefty pile of euros I left at her office helped make her Christmas. I did not get a kiss from the ladies of the cleaning service, I'm the chimney sweep, nor Desmond Collins the roofer, nor Tom the painter, even though I was sure I made their Christmases too. No, just from Clara. Although I had to admit that one from Iden, a sylph covered in soot who had the most amazing blue eyes, might have been welcome. So now I paced my newly redecorated living room, trying to convince myself that it would be smarter to wait until tomorrow to talk to Sophia. Of course, I knew that now would be the time to resolve the problem, but I was procrastinating. I needed to clear the air about all the changes I made to the cottage without consulting her, especially if she thought she was going to have to find the money to pay for repairs to the roof. Actually, replacement was more like it, and the wiring in the place, which was a fire hazard, as was the chimney. I needed to reassure her that I had already paid, and that she owed me nothing. The tougher part of the dilemma was the Clara kiss. I knew I owed Sophia no explanation, but I really did. From the look she gave us, we were lucky not to have been turned to stone on the spot. So what could I say? I was obviously enjoying the kiss too much to argue that Clara forced herself on me. Well, they do say the truth will set you free. I hoped so, because I had no plan B if that blew up in my face. The thought of facing a fiery redhead made me a spineless dolt. So I just turned and headed out the door. The cold winter's evening bit into me as I crossed the yard coatless. In moments, I was at her front door, reassured by the light coming from the windows in the front of the little house. I knocked and waited, heart thumping. I told myself this whole situation was ridiculous. Here I was, a grown man with adult daughters, a successful attorney, a not-so-successful husband, and I was standing coatless on the front porch of a woman I had known for only a couple of days, waiting to apologize for offending her. I really didn't need this, but I felt compelled to explain. I didn't want Sophia to think less of me. Even if she didn't speak to me the rest of the 6 months, at least I would have explained. Brrrr. What was taking her so long to answer? Just as I was getting ready to knock again, the door opened, and there was Sophia. Her face showed a mixture of surprise and sadness, and perhaps a little anger. Before I could say a word, she spat. "I thought you'd be busy tonight." I looked at her for a few moments, taking in her beauty and trying very hard not to take out my anger and frustrations with Nora on her. Finally, I simply said, "Not tonight, nor any night in the foreseeable future." Sophia looked at me as her anger seemed to ebb. "Well, since you're not busy, I guess you should come in then. We have some things to talk about." With that, she looked past me at the cottage. Then she opened the door wider and allowed me to enter the warmth of her living room. I rubbed my arms as I stepped into a very nicely furnished room, mostly filled with antiques, and she had a very nice fire at one end of the room. Obviously no chimney sweep needed here, I thought. Molly came over and greeted me, tail furiously wagging. She'd been quite a help with the supervision of the cottage makeover. At least dogs still liked me, I mused. I observed Sophia as she turned to face me. There was no invitation to settle in or get comfortable. She looked stunning, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a dark blue sweater that complemented her figure, fitted jeans, and simple ballet flats. She crossed her arms in front of her, her face slightly flushed. Was she still upset? It was hard to tell. "Sophia, I came to apologize and to explain about the cottage." "Yes?" she challenged. "Yes, still angry," I thought. "When I saw you this morning, I had intended to merely buy furniture for the cottage. I didn't intend to deceive you. Well, I just didn't tell you everything." Her green eyes flashed. An important rule to remember is when you're in a hole, stop digging, but I felt compelled to keep explaining. I needed her to know I hadn't taken advantage of her. I pressed on, despite the look she gave me. "Last night I tried to build a fire. The room filled with smoke, and the fireplace wouldn't draw. I damn near froze from having the windows open half the night. And then the rain started. I like the sound of rain on a roof, but around midnight the rain woke me. Not the sound, but the actual rain, which was dripping. No, that's not right. It felt like a torrent, and it was pouring on my face as I lay in bed." I watched her face lose its anger, and her expression turn to shock. "So when I saw you this morning, I didn't figure it was any big deal to have the chimney sweep come out, and I also got Mr. Collins to come have a look at the roof. I didn't mention I got his number from Clara. The less said about her, the better. I figured he would maybe just need to patch it, and I wouldn't even mention it to you. I should have known better. When he inspected the roof, he said the whole thing needed to be replaced, and he could have his crew out before noon. I'm sorry I didn't consult you before I gave him the go-ahead. I thought I'd probably see you sometime in the day to let you know. But I did pay him." Sophia couldn't quite hide her relief when I said that. "And while the roofers were working, the painters came. I thought the interior could use a bit of a spruce up." Again, not telling her it was Clara's idea. And then they delivered the new kitchen appliances, which promptly overloaded the circuits. Mr. Collins recommended an electrician, and of course you know how that went. Sophia's face softened. I detected a trace of a smile on her beautiful face, and she uncrossed her arms. I tried to keep my eyes away from her chest. "Oh, Luke, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Then she frowned as she continued. "I'll make arrangements to reimburse you the full amount." I moved to her and took her warm hands. "Sophia, that won't be necessary." She pulled her hands away. "I'll not take charity." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I smiled at her. "May I continue?" She nodded. "May I make you a loan for 6 months? And then if I decide to stay, we can work out an arrangement where part of each month's rent will be deducted from the loan?" Before she could answer, I added, "Of course I know the rent will be higher in summer, so maybe you could leave the rent as is and the difference would go to paying the loan?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said, "Thank you, Luke, I agree." We stood there just looking at each other for a few moments, and then Sophia said, "Have you eaten?" "No." In all the excitement, I quite forgot. "I'll make you something. Come into the kitchen." She started to turn away, but I stopped her, taking her hands again. "Sophia, despite what you saw, there is nothing between me and Clara, nor will there ever be." She looked at me for a long moment and simply nodded. Then we moved to the kitchen, and she still held my hand. So that's how it started. There were no passionate kisses or falling into bed. That night I received a chaste kiss on the cheek as I departed. But it was enough to confirm I was interested, but that interest was tempered by ghosts of Christmas past, or I should say Christmas present, in the haunting of my soul by infidelity and treachery. But somehow, every time I looked into Sophia's eyes, the life I'd fled in Chicago seemed many years and many miles away. But when I returned to Mary's cottage that night, that old life reasserted itself. As I sat in my new leather recliner in my newly painted and furnished living room with a cheerful fire sipping brandy, I powered up my computer. It effortlessly found my new wireless network. There were fewer emails than yesterday. I deleted many and moved the others to folders to look at later. There were some questions from my associates concerning some details on the cases I'd transferred, but nothing onerous. I knew I could answer with impunity because there was no way they could track me if anyone cared. Well, Robert Carter might care if he ever put two and two together. Again, there were still no emails from Nora or my daughters, Chloe and Emma. But there were a couple of text messages from my daughters on my phone. They were excited to be coming home for Christmas, and they let me know their arrival flight into O'Hare. Nora still had not told them we were divorcing. I sent a message to Dimitri and arranged for him to meet them at the airport. Then I sat and tried to figure out what to do. I had taken the coward's way out thinking that the girls would hear it from their mother when she called them in tears, telling them how she had screwed up and I was divorcing her. So much for the best laid plans. When had Nora intended to tell them? I had a mental picture of how that would play out as the girls arrived home. "Hi, Mom. Merry Christmas. By the way, where's Dad? Oh, he's left and he's divorcing me." So Nora was going to let me take the brunt of it. So be it. I consulted my phone and figured it was only the middle of the day in California, so I called. It rang a few times and I was thinking that maybe I'd have to leave a message when Chloe picked up. "Hi, Dad. Merry Christmas. Did you get our message?" That was the most difficult call I'd ever made. I felt really stupid telling the girls I was in Asia and wouldn't be home for Christmas and I was taking a sabbatical for a few months. I tried to explain that their mother and I had grown apart, and this was the best for us. I should have known better. They were my perceptive girls after all. So Mom did something stupid, didn't she? It really wasn't a question, more of a statement of fact. They must have figured out something was wrong before I did. I was trying to get past anger at Nora, so I just told them that was something they needed to take up with their mother. I promised my tearful girls I would stay in touch by phone and text and email, and as soon as I got myself established somewhere, I would have them visit me. Perhaps at spring break. Of course, that presented another problem. Here I was in Ireland as Luke Turner, and it would be darn difficult to explain the Ryan girls to Sophia and everyone else in the village. Maybe I could just go to the continent for a couple of weeks and rent a place there and meet the girls. Well, as Scarlett O'Hara said, I'll think about that tomorrow. When I finally got into my new dry and comfortable bed, I was angry and depressed. This disappearing thing had not turned out well. I was still helping my colleagues at work. My daughters wanted to be with me, and I was still being played by my ex-wife-to-be. I wondered if she had ever given a crap about anyone but herself. That was unfair, but I was in a foul mood. I woke up feeling slightly better, and on the return from my run I met up with Sophia and got to meet her daughter Lila as they walked to school. Later that day, Sophia and I had lunch together. That set a pattern. I would see Sophia most days, usually in the village for lunch or coffee, and occasionally we would walk to the Bowman for dinner. Lila was the darling of the place, and sometimes we would adjourn to Sophia's house for tea, and after Lila went to bed, Sophia and I would sit in her living room and talk seated close together on her big sofa. I tried to listen more than talk, not wanting to get ensnared in a web of lies that would certainly come back to haunt me. I kept thinking that I was stupid to have embarked on this whole charade anyway, particularly if Nora didn't care about me or my whereabouts. Trying to have two lives would be wearing and eventually impossible. It was during one of those quiet evenings she told me about Ethan, her late husband's brother, and his possessiveness since Sean was lost at sea. It was obvious she feared him. As she talked about his bullying and unwanted advances, I began to see red. She was also fearful for me as she explained about Ethan's jealousy of any man who dared to get close to her. One day after lunch, as we walked toward her office, she pointed him out, lurking not far away. He was a big man, over 6 feet like me, but maybe 80 pounds on me, flab and muscle. He had unkempt hair and a leer that was, I supposed, frightening to some. I was not impressed, but Sophia held my arm to prevent me from confronting him. That night she held my hands and cautioned me to be careful because Ethan had a fearful temper. I was going to make a joke of it, but her expression was so serious and eyes filled with concern for me that I simply promised I'd stay out of his way. Of course, I knew very well Ethan would provoke something. It was one of the few times I regretted not being in Chicago where I could call on some muscle of my own, or cause Ethan to disappear altogether if he became too threatening. Those friendly kisses on the cheek gradually turned into a warm hug and a goodnight kiss at the door, eventually evolving into a few gentle kisses while we sat together. It wasn't overly intense, but the comforting closeness of her body against mine as we sat by the fire, listening to the Atlantic storms outside, felt just right. We were both taking things slowly, and the pace seemed to suit us perfectly. Midway through the following week, Christmas week, Sophia and Lila were having a shopping night out with Fiona and Cork, so I was on my own. Rain threatened and I was very happy that Collins and his crew had some an excellent job on the roof, but I was restless. I thought about just making a sandwich, but finally decided to walk down to the Bowman. I grabbed my rain parka and made my way down the hill in the darkness, guided by the lights of Summer Cove on the water, and the waning moon which occasionally peeked through to show me the path. By that time, they knew me at the Bowman, and I had a table near the fireplace in the bar. I had opted for the bar instead of the restaurant upstairs because without Sophia, I felt more comfortable eating downstairs. I had just finished their wonderful seafood chowder and fresh bread and was relaxing with a cup of tea. I still hoped to see Sophia that night, so I refrained from having a beer. I watched Ethan Barrett enter the bar. He was wearing a rain-slicked fisherman's parka. Up to that time, he had tried to intimidate me and Sophia from a distance, but failing that, I knew a confrontation was inevitable. He didn't pause or even acknowledge the barman as he made his way to my table and leaned over me. He was drunk and smelled of beer and perspiration. He was also as ugly as sin. I'm just going to tell you one time to stay away from Sophia. She's not for you. She and I have an understanding. So there's no need for the likes of you to be hanging about. I could see he was a little surprised as I quickly stood and we were eye to eye. Mr. Barrett, where I come from, we do not discuss our women in bars. I had remembered that line from Robert Wayne in The Quiet Man and thought it appropriate. Regardless, Ms. Barrett is an honorable woman, and I'm certain she would have told me if you and she had what you called an understanding, which leads me to believe that you are a liar as well as ill-mannered. Barrett's face was as red with anger, and he clenched his fists. At that point, the bartender grabbed his arm. That's enough, Ethan. Get out. Barrett looked at the big bartender. Even drunk, he thought better of getting into it with him. As he was led to the door, he turned and said, "We ain't through. She's mine, and you'll regret those words." After a few moments of shocked silence, the other patrons returned to their meals and drinks, although I caught them glancing at me occasionally. A flash followed very closely by a clap of thunder punctuated the mood Barrett had set. The rain hissed. I waited just long enough to let Barrett get to where I expected him to be to ambush me. I pulled on my parka, and as I headed for the door, the bartender called out, "Watch yourself." I nodded as I left. Oh, I intended to. That was for sure. 2/3 of the way up the hill to the cottage was a dip in the hill which obscured the view from above and below. I knew he'd be there waiting in the rain. I was glad I'd not been drinking. The hood to my parka was down and my head was getting soaked, but I needed to hear him coming. When I got to the spot I had picked, there was no sign. I was almost disappointed, but it was a good thing I didn't let my guard down, because he came out of the dark and rain like a lumbering freight train. But he was also yelling like an idiot, "I'll kill you, you scumsucker." I was ready and easily sidestepped his charge, and I had enough time to stick out my foot and trip him. He landed on the rocky ground with an oof, and I also heard something that sounded like metal skitter away into the darkness. So whatever he was carrying, maybe a length of pipe, wasn't available to him any longer. That evened the odds a little bit. I moved in fast, not wanting to let him up. If he got his hands on me, no matter the boxing skills I'd picked up in the past year, he had the extra weight on me and would most certainly kill me. He was on hands and knees when I delivered a set of blows to his back and kidneys. Each time I hit his fleshy back, he grunted. He swung out one of his beefy arms and just caught me on the side of the thigh. I jumped back. Damn, that hurt. I moved back in as he got to his knees and hit him hard, several quick jabs to his midsection. Somehow he managed to get to his feet. Even in his drunken condition, I knew the blows had to hurt. I was hitting with all my strength and with the fury that had been bottled up inside me for months. I avoided his head, knowing I might break a knuckle or hand on his hard skull. It would be harder to put him down with body blows alone, but that's what I did. He charged me again, howling like some hound from hell. I sidestepped again, helped by the darkness, and kicked him in the back as he rushed by, sending him sprawling. Again I was on him, punching, and punching. He somehow managed to get to his knees again, but I delivered some effective punches to his solar plexus. He went down curled in a ball, gasping for breath. I could have killed him then. Actually, I might have already damaged his internal organs enough that he would not survive, but I doubted it. He was pretty tough. I knelt on the rain-slick ground next to him, breathing heavily. His mouth gaped, his breath fetid. Sometime during our fight, the storm had abated, blown away like my fury, and by the light of the crescent moon, I could see the look of fear in his eyes as I spoke to him. "Ethan, here's how it's going to be. You're going to take your boat and leave Kinsale. If you ever bother me or Sophia again, I'll make sure you die slowly and painfully, and then you'll be out in the Atlantic with an anchor around your legs. Crab bait like your brother Sean." At that second I saw it in the dim moonlight, something more than fear of me or fear of death. I shuddered with the knowledge of it and said, "You did it, didn't you?" He wouldn't look at me, knowing what I was asking. "You killed Sean out there on the ocean, didn't you? You wanted Sophia for yourself?" His face betrayed his guilt. "Ethan, I think you better run far away, but you can't run from yourself. The evil inside you has taken over, and the devil is waiting to take you to hell. I got to my feet, shaking from the adrenaline. Then I did something I didn't know I had in me. I spat on him. The spit landed on his face, and he flinched. Ethan moaned and got to his hands and knees, spewing the contents of his stomach, but he was no longer a threat. I left him, and as I walked away I could hear him vomiting on the wet, stony Irish ground. I didn't get much sleep that night. A couple of aspirin didn't help with the throbbing in my leg. Even down and drunk Ethan Barrett could swing a mean arm. Thank goodness that was the only time he connected. I kept replaying the fight, and the awful knowledge that he had killed Sophia's husband nagged at me. I didn't know what I would do with that knowledge. I certainly couldn't tell Sophia. In fact, there was no way to explain to anyone how I knew anyway, and I certainly didn't want to report our altercation to the police. Luke Turner needed to keep a low profile. That was another problem. As I tossed and turned, I thought about the last couple of weeks and all the effort that went into my disappearance and to what effect. Apparently Nora didn't care, or blithely assumed I didn't mean to divorce her. I imagined a scene where I walked into our house after several weeks' absence, and there would be Nora rushing out the door, cell phone to her ear saying something like, "Oh, there you are, Luke. Sorry, I won't be home for dinner, but I'm sure Maria can rustle you up something. Got to run. Bye." She'd give me a quick kiss on the cheek as she went by looking beautiful and smelling delicious. Yes, it was almost laughable. I tried to make a statement about our marriage and her infidelity, and what had it gained me? My wife refusing to notice my absence and the fact I was divorcing her. And my daughters miserable because their father wasn't going to be home to share Christmas with the family. I was an idiot. My work had followed me to Ireland, although that was my fault. Why couldn't I just leave those kids at the firm to figure it out on their own? So was my little tantrum all for naught? Sophia's face came to mind. No, of everything that had happened the past weeks, the fact I had met Sophia made it all worthwhile. Had it? Yes, I was certain. She was beautiful and smart, and had a wonderful daughter, and I cared about her. How much? Was my attraction to her that of an older man escaping a failed marriage, trying to recapture his youth? Was I just rebounding? Lots of unanswered questions roiled my mind. And of course the biggest question was, how did Sophia feel about me? I thought I knew, but there had been little that was obvious. She knew I was fleeing a failed marriage, and that alone should warn her off. I was 12 years older. Was that too much for her? I was wealthy, at least in her terms, and she knew it. Was her reticence just a ploy to snag me, where Clara had been more overt? I doubted it, but in the middle of the night with the rain coming again, it was hard to keep all the wild thoughts straight. Finally, I put my litigator skills to work and got my thoughts under control. On the plus side, I was in a warm cottage in Ireland with a beautiful young woman as my landlord, who apparently cared some for me. Nobody really knew where I was. I could pitch my phone and shut off my computer and just become Luke Turner. If Nora failed to acknowledge the divorce, it would be awarded by default. There were two big downsides. I was living a lie, and I hated to lie to Sophia. And the longer I kept lying to her, that harder it would be to reel it all in. The other was my daughters. I couldn't bear being cut off from them. These issues were unresolved when I finally got to sleep. I was awakened by the ringing of my cell phone. It was Joe Akers, and it was 5 a.m. A quick calculation told me it was 9 p.m. the night before in Chicago. "Joe, don't you ever sleep?" "No. If I do, I can't charge you double time." He laughed. "So where the hell are you these days?" he asked. "Oh, out on the left coast basking in the sun and watching gorgeous babes in bikinis play beach volleyball while you're freezing your butt off in Chicago." I lied. "Nice. Just wish I was there." "Then how would you get away with charging me all that money?" "I'd still charge you, but I'd be a damn sight warmer." "So Joe, is this just a social call to pad my bill, or is there a reason?" "Just thought I'd tip you off that Robert Carter was indicted by a federal grand jury and arrested late this afternoon. The feds are charging him with money laundering, racketeering, and some other bad stuff. Our old school mate Mike Flynn is taking the time from his constant political maneuvering to prosecute the case personally." He chuckled. Ever the protector of the people of Illinois, Mike timed it perfectly to get the perp walk on the evening news. "Can't say I'm sorry." "Yeah, I understand. But they also got Tom Franks." "You're kidding. Robert's a slimeball, but I never figured on Tom." "Well, it looks like they were in it together, so a shitstorm is going to come down on the firm." Mike's official comment was that they had a tip which led to an ongoing investigation in the grand jury indictment, and they had to move on this one right away to prevent additional wrongdoing. "You don't know anything about this, do you?" "Not a thing, Joe. I'm just out here in California relaxing, enjoying my retirement, and staying the hell away from Nora. By the way, any word from her attorney?" "Nada, and I can't find anyone in town who's representing her. I don't know what the hell is going on." The process server said he gave her the documents personally and gave her your message, but then he said she was so calm it was weird, and she said it was all a mistake. Well, if we don't get a response in 30 days, I'll move for a default judgment. If that's still what you want. That's what I want, and I'm not going to change my mind. Okay, Luke, just checking. By the way, you don't have any plans to leave the country, do you? I suddenly felt a chill. No, why? Mike and his investigators are going to want to interview everyone in the firm, especially the partners and senior partners. All the financial records have been subpoenaed, and they're going to look at everything under a magnifying glass. If you think they might find anything, I can give you the name of the best guy in town. I don't think I'll need him, Joe. I really am as clean as can be, and remember, they just selected me for senior partner. Of course, since I was the guy who sent the tsunami information to Mike, I figured I was pretty safe. Yeah, I figured. Plus, I've known you since Sister May Catherine slapped us both silly in grade school. I'd be pretty disappointed to find out you were involved in this kind of stupidity. Thanks. And what kind of stupidity would that be, do you know, or just guessing? My source tells me that Robert and Tom were working with the mob, funneling money through the firm's books and in some cases their personal accounts. Geez, that is stupid. Not like they weren't making enough money, Joe replied. Plus the feds tumbled onto a storage unit on the south side that had over $25 million in cash in it. That alone should get Mike elected to whatever he wants. He laughed. Guess they just figured they'd never get caught. Wonder who tipped off the feds? Good question, Joe. They pissed off somebody. Not much doubt about that. I replied, knowing full well it was me they'd pissed off. Well, I've got to go. Happy hour starts down on the beach soon, and those volleyball honeys need some company. Just remember, Luke, keep in touch and no out-of-the-country trips. I've got everything I need here in sunny Southern California. It looked like my plan to screw with Robert Carter had turned out to just what I'd anticipated. The mob guys were not going to be happy that a chunk of their cash was now in some federal facility. I wondered where they would find a space to hold all that cash. That brought me back to the question of the $5 million I had compliments of Brendan O'Connell. Had it belonged to Robert or his employers? I suspected it was Robert's, as his commission, considering $5 million, was peanuts when you looked at the probability that hundreds of millions of dollars were involved. I did hope it was money he was skimming, but either way, he'd never see it again. What would I do with it? I hadn't thought about that. So far, I hadn't touched it. If anyone was curious about my finances, all they would see was expenses drawn from my own money, even if my money was in offshore accounts and in places like Madrid. I had a terrible thought. What if Robert had involved Nora in some way? It would be like him. I hope not. I didn't think even Nora was gullible enough to get mixed up in some shady business. And despite her infidelity, I didn't want her to end up dead at the hands of some hired killer. So now what was I going to do about her? The default judgment seemed the best way to go, but that might never break through her denial. What the hell was she playing at? Sure, we had grown apart over the years as our careers took off, but I still had loved her. And with all the opportunities presented at work and elsewhere, I never succumbed. That was what marriage was about, and those important wedding vows. Reluctantly, I thought maybe it was time to confront her and show her some pictures. Then I went back to sleep for 3 hours, my mind mostly at peace since I had the germ of a plan in place. It was 2 days before Christmas. When I ventured out of my bed the second time that day, I pulled up my email while sipping coffee. There was a raft of emails from the firm, passing on facts and rumors. I deleted most of them. A few complimented me on my, as always, impeccable timing. I was amused. Of course, there was no sign of Sophia at that late morning hour. She had most likely gone to her office hours ago, although I knew Lila was out of school. I cleaned up and walked into Kinsale, passing the spot where I had pounded Ethan Barrett last night. The rain had passed, and the day was winter, mild and sunny, and there was no sign of anything amiss. The rocky soil gave nothing away. I was glad. I was also glad I had not killed him. No argument, he deserved it, but I didn't think I was the right one to mete out karmic justice to Mr. Barrett, at least at this moment. I walked into Sophia's office. She smiled and waved me in since she was on the phone. Her green eyes sparkled. The part of my heart I had left melted. Lila was at a small desk in the corner with some drawing paper. She smiled at me too. Today Sophia was wearing a white wool sweater with a gold Christmas tree pin, and her hair framed her face. That was all I could see behind the desk. She was beautiful. She hung up and finished putting some notes in her computer and then said, "How was your evening? It was kind of late when we got in last night. I was a bit disappointed not to see at least a light on at the cottage." She wore just a bit of an insecure frown. I moved around the desk and took her hands as she stood. I noticed she was wearing a dark skirt and heels. She looked delectable as usual. "Sophia, I miss seeing you, but for some reason I was exhausted last night, and then I didn't get much sleep until after 5 this morning. I'm sorry." The frown was back as she put her hand on the side of my face. It was cool and soft. I wanted to kiss it. Luke, are you feeling all right? She started to pull her hand away, but I held it against my face. Never better. Never better. When I released her hand, she blushed. God, she was beautiful. Ready for some lunch? I asked as my breathing returned to normal. Sophia nodded, and I helped her on with her coat and was treated to the wonderful smell of her. The three of us walked down to the harbor to a fish restaurant that had quite a well-deserved reputation for excellent food. I noticed Sophia looking around. She tried not to be obvious, but I knew she was looking for Ethan. There was no sign. I hoped he had taken my suggestion and left town. Over lunch, she told me about her adventures with her sister shopping in Cork. Fiona's husband had been the babysitter for the kids, and Sophia and Fiona had a wonderful time. I smiled at her, enjoying the sharing of her afternoon and evening with her sister with me. It crossed my mind that I just couldn't remember when I had last had a lunch conversation with Nora, or any conversation where she hadn't been talking about some social gathering she attended or catered with the Chicago upper crust. It seemed that with our daughters gone, there wasn't much to talk about except work. And I guess she didn't want to share the fun of her affair with Robert Carter with me. Lila was very excited about her part in the school's Christmas pageant. Will you come, Mr. Turner? She asked. I looked at Sophia and she smiled and nodded her approval. Lila, I will be honored. Thank you for the invitation. After lunch, we strolled back up into town, Sophia's arm through mine. We window shopped and I took note of a few things she admired. As usual, I got an affectionate hug and a soft but brief kiss at her office as we said our goodbyes. I went on my way smiling. I spent the afternoon shopping and looking around the town. I ended up in front of a large gray church. The sign said, St. Robert the Baptist. I hadn't even been in a church since a service for my mother 20 years ago. She had died of cancer when I was 25. It was tough on the family, especially my father, who never really got over it and only hung on for another 5 years. I knew my three sisters still attended regularly. I hadn't thought of them much either. They'd be looking for me this year too as part of the Ryan family dinner and football fest. Nora usually did not attend. Too much chaos for her, she said. My oldest brother was in Singapore, and the youngest, Michael, was a Marine officer in Afghanistan. I walked up the steps half expecting the doors to be locked, but this was Ireland. They opened easily and I made my way into the silent church, the interior illuminated by the winter sun shining through stained glass windows. I took a seat in one of the rearmost pews. It was blessedly quiet. I sighed as I looked at the altar, and the old familiar feelings came back. Why had I quit going? I couldn't even remember, it had been so long. Of course, Nora was not religious in the least. She worshipped at the altar of commerce and money. That wasn't really a fair description. Nora was an excellent mother and had been a wonderful wife for a long time. When had we stopped being a couple? I don't know how long I sat there lost in my thoughts before an older man, maybe 60s and very tall and thin, dressed in dark slacks and shirt wearing a clerical collar, came out from the side of the altar. It was only when he stood at the pulpit looking over his notes, probably for his Christmas homily, that he appeared to notice me. I went back to my thoughts, and after a while I heard his footsteps, and I looked up. Welcome, he said in a classic Irish accent, as he stood near where I was sitting. Then he appeared to recognize me and said, So you're Sophia's Canadian? I wasn't really surprised that he knew me. It was a small village and the slow season, although I thought his observation was an interesting way to put it. I thought, did he mean as in Sophia was my landlord, or had she told him something more? Or was it just common knowledge around the small town that we were becoming a couple? I only nodded. Even though I had not been a practicing Catholic in many years, I didn't want to lie to a priest. I had guessed correctly about his age. Close up, he was probably in his 60s, and he had the look of a wise and caring man. I was sure in his life as a priest he had heard it all. He looked at me as if looking into my soul. What's the problem, my son? So for the first time in 25 years, a priest heard my confession as he sat beside me in that beautiful church. When I was done, he just sat and looked out the window at the fading light, then turned to me and said, Luke Ryan, from Chicago, is it? Not Luke Turner from Canada? I nodded. Luke, I think you are now on the right track from what you've told me of your plans. I'm glad you've not been committing adultery with Sophia. I've known her all her life, and she's special. She's not had an easy life. She deserves to be happy, and you've the ability to give her that happiness, but she is vulnerable, and you can cause her great harm. You must be truthful with her. Your reasons for this masquerade are a bit convoluted, but I think she'll understand. He paused, looking at me. Luke, now think about this. What is it you're running away from? A number of quick answers sprang to mind, but I took my time. Well, Father, I wanted to get away from my wife. Her betrayal hurt me worse than anything I've experienced. He said nothing. and I needed to get away from my job. Not because I was also betrayed by my boss, and it seems everyone in the firm knew it, but because I was tired, burned out after 20 years of unrelenting pressure. The combination of Nora's betrayal and my promotion just pushed me over the edge. Couldn't stand to see any of them any longer or face another day in my office or in a jail or a courtroom. I was done. When was the last time you and your wife took a vacation? Just the two of you? He asked. I looked at him. I can't remember. So with your job and hers, you both lost sight of the most important person in your lives, each other? I nodded sadly. And somehow you got comfortable with the idea that work and nothing else was the norm? Yes. You forgot that a successful marriage is something a couple needs to work on every day? Yes, but she betrayed you? Yes, she did, and I'm not in any way excusing her infidelity. It's just that when a marriage fails, there are always two sides, and lots of extenuating factors. The biggest is that we lose sight of what's important. I just looked at him. Do you still love her, Luke? Yes, I do, at least I think so. I guess if I didn't, I wouldn't feel this terrible. Do you think you can forgive her? And don't give me a quick answer. That's something to think about. But you do need to forgive her so you can resolve this. So you can move on whether it's with her or apart. But it's not something you have to do right away. You're angry and disappointed and a bit lost without your partner of 25 years. Plus you've suffered a blow to your ego. That really hurts, especially when your wife's infidelity occurred with someone you don't hold in high regard anyway. You have self-doubts that will destroy you if you let them fester. Father Seamus was right, but I hated to hear those words. I had been wallowing in the mud of self-pity, and my absence was hurting those closest to me and those who depended on me. Life sucked. Now as to your wife. As you know, the church doesn't condone divorce. You weren't married in the church, but nevertheless you must go see her. I think you know you owe her that. So far she seems to have been calling the tune, so now she needs to know how she has hurt you. The lack of communication with you could be indifference, or it could be shock, paralysis in the face of your actions. You've left her and are divorcing her. She needs to come to grips with what she has done, to understand what she has done to your marriage. His words made sense to the litigator in me, but the hurt side of me wanted to reject them. I knew I had to follow his advice, though. If you decide to divorce her, then you will have decisions to make, as will Sophia if you were to be together. She's been remarkably happy these past couple of weeks. I hope you will be truthful with her. As to your job, well, you do need some time away, and if you don't feel you will ever be comfortable at your old firm again, then go find something else to do. Luke, from what I've heard of you since your arrival, you are a doer, and from what you've told me, you see yourself as sort of the Caped Crusader of Chicago. He smiled as he said it. You appear to get the greatest enjoyment out of defending the oppressed and the underdog. You're too young to hide yourself away in Kinsale. Think about it. Finally, he said, Ethan Barrett is a violent man and certainly in need of some corporal punishment, although I can't condone the violence, but your description of your altercation rings true. You've told me that it is your impression that he killed his brother, and I believe you, knowing he is capable of great violence. I hope he will go to the authorities and confess. Father Seamus gave me absolution, plus many things to consider. I felt much better, perhaps because of the clarity of thought he'd helped me achieve. I spent the next hour making phone calls. My mind was still going a mile a minute as I walked up the hill to the cottage. I was puzzled at the sight of a police car outside my door. As I reached the car, the two policemen, actually one was a woman, were just turning from the door. Mr. Turner? Yes. The large man, maybe mid-40s who was in a suit, said, I'm Inspector Harris and this is Sergeant Boyle, indicating a diminutive, dark-haired woman in uniform who stood next to him. Neither offered to shake my hand. What's this about, Inspector? He was a florid-faced man with a nose that looked more like it belonged in a boxing ring than in the Engarda Syacana. Although I reminded myself I had seen that nose on a goodly number of Chicago cops. The older Irish ones particularly. Perhaps we could go inside? My insides were shaking as I struggled to maintain a calm demeanor. Had I been discovered? Certainly Father Seamus hadn't turned me in. I was puzzled. When we entered the cottage, they declined my offer to have a seat. Inspector Harris shook his head. Mr. Turner, can you tell us the last time you saw Ethan Barrett? I was so relieved that this wasn't about me using a false passport and being in Ireland. I almost let my disinterested facade slip. Buck up, man. You've faced tougher cops and judges than this in your time. I thought. Of course. Last night about 8, I guess. Mr. Barrett accosted me at Bowman's. He was drunk and he threatened me. Neither of them was taking notes, so I figured they had already been to Bowman's and knew the story. What happened then? I left the bar about 15 minutes later and walked back up here in the pouring rain. And you didn't see him? No. I half expected to, but he was pretty drunk, so I figured he'd gone off somewhere to sleep it off. They both looked at me, waiting me out. It was an old trick that I'd seen many times by Chicago cops trying to see if a suspect would say anything more. I didn't. Finally, I ventured. "Has something happened to Mr. Barrett?" They exchanged a glance. Then the inspector spoke. "Mr. Barrett hired on a couple of local lads to go fishing this morning, but no one has seen him. His boat is anchored in the bay and his car is parked in town. There's no sign of him." "His house?" I questioned. They exchanged another glance. "He lives on the boat and his dinghy is still tied to the quay." "Oh, well maybe he's still sleeping it off somewhere. He was pretty drunk." Inspector Harris put his card on my kitchen counter. "If you see Mr. Barrett, please call us." They left without another word. While we had been talking, I noticed the sergeant looking around the room and also examining my hands. Good thing I didn't have to explain the large bruise forming on my thigh. So Barrett was missing. He certainly would not have left town without his boat or car. It was probably that he was sleeping it off somewhere, but I really did hope that Ethan Barrett would never be seen again. He was an evil man, capable of murder and a threat to me and people I cared about. My threat to him was not an idle one, and if he reappeared, then I would have to take action. That night I joined Sophia at Lila's school for their annual Christmas pageant. There were some puzzled looks, but many of the people attending had seen me around town or had dealings with me over the time I'd been in Kinsale, including Devin Collins, who had replaced the roof on the cottage. After the performance, I carried a sleeping Lila up the hill and helped Sophia tuck her in. As we stood there watching the sleeping girl, Sophia slipped her arm around my waist and rested her head against my shoulder. We adjourned to the front room, and she sat close on her sofa. I put my arm around her. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "Luke, I have become very attached to you in a short time, and I need to know." I kissed her lightly on the lips. "Does that answer your question?" She snuggled against me. "You really are divorcing your wife?" I looked at her and said, "Oh, I see." Any number of married men use that line to fool impressionable young women. Well, Sophia, it's not a line. She was unfaithful, and the affair was with one of my business partners. I can't get past that. It's not just stupid male pride. Although I have been terribly wounded, but I could never trust her again. And trust is very important to me. Do you understand? She nodded, eyes glistening. I really didn't want to tell her the rest, but I knew I had to. I had to be truthful with Sophia. Would she hate me for deceiving her? I guess I'd find out. I took her hands and said, "There's more." She looked puzzled. So I told her about being Luke Ryan from Chicago, attorney, litigator, and partner in a large firm, and how I had put together a complicated scheme to escape my wife and my life in Chicago. As I described it for the second time today, it sounded even more foolish. When I left, Sophia was in tears. The next morning I awoke feeling groggy from lack of useful sleep. I was in Ireland to get away and relax and sleep in. No such luck. I had complicated my new life almost as bad as my old one. I had planned to be Luke Turner, the hermit in a cottage in a small village for a few months and have little contact with anyone. Those best-laid plans were shot to hell by falling in love. Yes, falling in love with a beautiful Irish girl. Shit. It was drizzling as I set out on my pre-dawn run. I ran and ran, trying to outrun Nora and the firm and the problems I'd created by lying and then telling the truth to Sophia. I asked myself why I'd even set foot in that church yesterday. Well, my mother used to say, "If you want to know if God has a sense of humor, tell him all your plans." She was a wise woman. By the time I returned to the cottage, the wind had increased and brought with it the beginning of an Atlantic storm. I was drenched, and as I stepped through my door, I was astonished to see Sophia asleep in my recliner. A soft handmade throw covered her from neck to toes. She looked angelic. I walked softly past her to the bath to undress and shower. What did her presence in my home mean? The hot water felt good on my chilled body. I hated to leave the shower, but I was curious about what Sophia would have to say to me. No, actually, I was dreading it. I feared she was here to tell me face to face that she never wanted to see me again, that she too valued trust, and the fact I had deceived her was more than she could accept. I didn't bother to shave, knowing my shaking hands would leave my face bloody. I dressed in a thick robe and from the hall peeked out at her. She was still asleep, so I went into my bedroom and dressed in a comfortable pair of jeans and a heavy wool sweater and some slippers. I walked down the hall, steeling myself for what was to come. She was no longer in the chair. Had she lost her nerve and left? As I entered the living room, I spotted her in the kitchen. She had the kettle on and was putting the tea fixings together. The toaster oven hummed. Tea and scones, perhaps? Hopefully that's a good sign, I thought. Sophia looked at me, and before I could say anything, she flung herself into my arms. Neither of us said anything. Finally, she stepped back, tears streaking her cheeks. "Oh, Luke. Luke, please don't leave me. Don't ever leave me." She sobbed before nestling in my arms again. I'm so sorry I deceived you. I whispered in her ear. That's why I needed to tell you. To try to make you understand. I was foolish and stupid. She pulled back just enough to look up at me. Her sad eyes melted me, and I said, I love you, Sophia. There I had said what I felt. Did I really love her? Yes, there was no doubt. Her eyes lost their sadness, and she hugged me tightly. I love you so much, Luke. It makes my heart ache when we're apart. I kissed her. She kissed me. We didn't hold back, and perhaps could have been that way for hours had the kettle not started to sing. We broke apart, Sophia brushing tears and fished in her pockets for a tissue. I stood close with my arms around her from behind as she finished pouring the tea and getting the scones from the oven. Eventually, she prepared a tray to take to the table in front of the fire where we sat side by side on the sofa. She smiled sadly as I told her I had to go back to Chicago, but she nodded her understanding of my plans and the need for seeing my family and daughters on Christmas. She also agreed that I needed to see Nora. I saw no insecurity in her eyes as I told her I'd be back in a week. She surprised me when she said, Luke, will you go to Mass with me tonight? It's the midnight service at St. Robert's. I smiled and nodded and held her, feeling her warmth and thinking about a future with a woman who loved me and cared about me. The midnight service was well attended, and the church was decorated with all the trappings of the celebration of Christ's birth. Lila was well rested after having an evening nap. Sophia was beautiful as usual, wearing a dark wool skirt, red silk blouse, and black boots, was standing close to me holding my hand. Next to her was Lila, and next to her was Fiona and her family. Her husband, Matthew, seemed a really nice guy. Outside the church, Fiona had greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. I wondered what secrets Sophia had shared with her. I left an envelope with a generous donation in the collection plate. Father Seamus had merely pointed out the obvious, but I had needed the guidance. Sophia squeezed my hand as we listened to the familiar words beginning the Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. And it came to pass in those days, there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. After the service, we stopped by the church door to greet Father Seamus. Both women looked surprised as he shook my hand and said, There you are, Luke. I saw you flanked by these angels. He indicated Fiona and Sophia and touched Lila's head as she dozed peacefully in my arms. You are a lucky man. I looked at him for a second and said, Yes, Father, I am, and thank you. He nodded and said, I look forward to seeing you at Mass in the weeks ahead. Sophia stood looking puzzled as I replied, As long as I'm with these angels, I'll be here. We both laughed. So you know Father Seamus too? Sophia asked as we walked to the car. She held the umbrella while I carried Lila. Of course. Kinsale's not that big, you know. I teased. Sophia just smiled and shook her head. As the rain poured, we took the rental car I'd hired back to Summer Cove. Once we got Lila tucked in, Sophia and I exchanged gifts on that early Christmas morning. I gave her a gold heart on a chain as a token of my love. Her eyes glistened as I fastened it around her neck. She gave me an antique silver pocket watch that had belonged to her father and grandfather, and inside was her picture. It was a beautiful object worn from years of use by hands of men who loved Sophia. I was overwhelmed by the gesture. Thank you, Sophia. It's beautiful and I'll treasure it. Finally, it was time for me to go. We stood holding each other for a long time. Good night, Sophia, my love. I'll see you in just a few days. Merry Christmas. I love you. Tears streaming, she replied. Merry Christmas, Luke. Take good care of yourself. I love you. I'll pray every day for your safe journey and for your safe return. She walked me out to the car, ignoring the rain. Travel safe, my love, and come back to me, she said as she kissed me one more time. I put the car in gear and drove away from the house above Summer Cove, heading for Dublin in an early morning Christmas Day flight to Chicago. I would make it to Chicago in my borrowed condo on Lake Shore Drive with time to spare to have Christmas afternoon with my daughters. Friends had volunteered to find a tree and decorations. It was nice having friends who cared, and the girls and I would still have plenty of time Christmas evening for the Ryan family dinner and football fest. I smiled as I thought how well Sophia would fit in with my three sisters and their families. I had a round-trip ticket, and my heart and soul felt at peace for the first time in a long time. Luke's car hummed as it made its way through the quiet streets of Chicago, the brisk December air brushing against the window. He had promised Sophia he'd return soon, but now, with the weight of the past waiting for him at home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of finality settling over him. The time for confrontation had come. As he pulled up to the house, memories of the life he had built with Nora and their daughters swirled in his mind. Entering the house, Luke took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Nora stood in the living room, her face pale and tear-streaked, waiting for him. The moment was inevitable. I'm here, Nora, Luke said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. I've thought a lot about this. The day you cheated on me, you stopped being my wife. I want no grudge between us, but you need to understand that I've moved on. You have to move on too. Tears welled up in Nora's eyes, and her voice cracked as she spoke. Luke, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. I want to fix things, to make it right. Luke shook his head, his expression softening but firm. I've already forgiven you, Nora, but there's no going back. Our relationship can't be what it once was. We both have to let go of the past, for the sake of everyone involved. Nora sobbed, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. Luke stood there, letting the silence between them stretch, knowing that there was no easy resolution to their pain. But in that moment, it became clear that their marriage had reached its end. As the days passed, the realization settled in for both Luke and Nora. Their daughters, now understanding the truth about their parents' separation, were more resilient than either had expected. Luke remained calm and steadfast, ensuring that his girls understood they would always be loved by both of them, despite the changes in their family dynamic. The final step came when Nora signed the divorce papers, a symbol of the painful but necessary conclusion to their life together. Luke, though heartbroken, felt a sense of peace knowing that he had made the right decision. His attorney handled the final details, and with the official dissolution of their marriage, Luke turned his attention toward the future. He couldn't deny the bond he had built with Sophia. She had brought a light into his life that he hadn't known he needed. As he reconnected with her, he felt a sense of hope growing stronger within him. Sophia had been his pillar of support, and now, together, they could look forward to a new chapter. Luke returned to Kinsale, where Sophia was waiting. As soon as he saw her, the warmth in her smile reassured him that he was finally where he belonged. They embraced, the kiss they shared speaking volumes of the love that had blossomed between them. After a moment, Luke looked into her eyes, his voice full of resolve. "Let's go to the church," he said. "I want to make sure I'm free from everything that's held me back." Hand in hand, they walked to St. Robert's, where Father Seamus was waiting. In the stillness of the church, Luke stood before him, Sophia's hand in his, and spoke words that echoed with liberation. "Father, I'm ready to move on. I'm free from my past, free from the burden of resentment. I've forgiven what needed to be forgiven, and now I'm ready to embrace the future." Father Seamus nodded, his expression calm and understanding. "You've made peace with yourself, Luke. That is what matters most." With Sophia by his side, Luke felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like a road worth traveling. They had both found a new beginning, free to move forward together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.